All right, how's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio. It is probably Saturday that you're watching this. Well, it is not Saturday today. And I'll actually turn the light on this time because I have a friend. Yes, I have a couple of those. His name's Gregor. Shout out to him, by the way. He's even though he's Slovenian, he's still my friend. And he told me I look like a corpse when I don't turn the light on. So I'll just turn the light on now just to make him happy. Hope you had a good week. I did. It was a busy week from a research perspective, and but I did I did three good conversations actually. There was one with John Ciampaglia. There was one with Ian Castle talking about one of my stocks that finally went up. Talked about it last week in the barbecue too. And I did one with Ben Feingold from Ocean Wall that will probably upload it on Monday. As to this barbecue, there's only three companies this week that there was supposed to be six. I was supposed to talk to six companies, two of those canceled, and another one just straight up declined the interview 2 minutes after we started shooting, too. So it's a long story, and I'm not here to make anyone look bad. So whatever. Good luck to them. So yeah, it's a good mixed bag here today. So we'll be talking about different resources, but I'll just get to it, but not before I've told you that here at Resource Talks we don't hate you, and therefore you should know that I have no idea what I'm doing. And although, as I said, I have finally made a paper win, I've not sold yet. So I've never made any serious money in the space, and I should not be considered any type of authority. So don't ask me about my picks. Don't ask me what I think of your dying junior, and don't get mad at me when I tell you that I don't know, because I actually don't. The fact that I'm grilling these CEOs does not mean much or shouldn't mean much to you. It doesn't mean I'm buying their stock, and it by far doesn't mean that you should blindly do so either. I'm simply in the process of turning rocks, looking for opportunities for my portfolio. So I'm going to talk to good, I'm going to talk to bad, and I'm going to talk to ugly companies. So all of the above. And in this episode in particular, um, I'm I'm going to be talking to a couple of companies who also pay me to do so. So I'm talking to Ridgeline Minerals and Fission Uranium, both of which are paying clients of Resource Talks. So err on the side of caution and just look at this program as an advertisement. Matter of fact, these companies have many of these companies have active marketing campaigns. That's how this space operates. But a lot of the people interviewing them don't want you to know that. Again, I don't hate you, so I do want you to know that, and you should listen with a grain of salt. That's the main message here. And while multiple minutes of research might have gone into this, and while I don't share the questions up front, nor do I give the companies editing rights, this is still just an advertisement and not independent research. Just look at these conversations as conversations. They're general and impersonal, private conversations between two talking heads on the internet. And if you don't enjoy losing money, you should head over to setterplus.ca, where you'll find the company's official filings, and then call Elon Musk to ask him to imprint them into your brain, and then talk to a professional investment advisor before taking your own decision in the end, because the mineral exploration, development, and mining industry is a risky space to deploy capital in. I was going to say the marketing industry, that's also a risky place to deploy capital in, because all investments contain risks. And these people specifically are running around the world. They're looking for rocks that they think are very pretty and hidden treasures and stuff like that. So it is in their nature to talk with forward-looking statements and refer to uncertain events that may or may not happen in the future in a way that makes it feel like they do know what's going to happen in the future, but none of us really do. So please just don't blindly rely on any of this. And with all that said, first things first that we're doing today is traveling to the US, Nevada specifically, where we're going to be looking for copper gold porphyries with Chad Peters, the CEO and founder of Ridgeline Minerals, and also again a paying client of Resource Talks. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange under the ticker symbol RDG, where an average of about 60,000 shares trade each day, with a 52-week high of 26.5 cents and a 52-week low of 8 cents. With a market cap of just under $10 million and about 91 million shares outstanding, today this is about a 9.5 or 10-cent stock. There are 6.3 million warrants at 30 cents that expired this September, and 11.3 million warrants expiring next April, also at 30 cents, with 5 million options and about a million and a half RSUs, resulting in about 115 million fully diluted shares. CEO Chad Peters over here owns 4.2% of the company, and with him, the management in total owns 9.8% of the whole thing, with a couple of famous names like Rick Roll being involved in the story. I believe he was a lead order on one of the financings about a year or so ago. Stevens Investment Management is also holding a chunk of it. So that's all in here. As with the last financial statement, it was an interim financial statement. It was dated September 30th. The company had about $1.7 million in current assets, about 1.5 of which in actual cash. And that cash sat on the balance sheet against short-term account payables of about $250,000 and a small portion of a lease liability for a total of about 300 grand in current liabilities. That same statement tells me that Ridgeline spent on average over the first 9 months of fiscal 2023 about $80,000 per month on operational expenses, while about $180,000 was spent on exploration and evaluation, with drilling being about a third of that, which means that G&A was around 25% of the overall expense of the company for the first 9 months of 2023. Please do head over to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca to look at the most up-to-date numbers yourself, though, and its official news releases, because this is a non-revenue generating company that relies on public markets for financings, but they're also a hybrid company, so they do deals and cash comes and goes. So that means that the numbers might be different by the time you're watching this. Boring stuff aside, though, yeah, as I mentioned, somewhat of a unique vehicle here. This is a hybrid exploration company because they can run both on Canadian and US dollars. So that's not a good enough joke, but I guess they are actually a hybrid company that does both prospect generating and exploration. Okay, so they do both their own drilling and they let people drill on their properties, earning into ownership. That's a strategy that I hope I can hear more about as we move on. But the flagship land position here is about 195 square kilometers, and it contains 5 projects in Nevada. They're spread across both the Battle Mountain and the Carlin Trend down there. And the flagship project among them is called Salina. This is a 100% owned 39 square kilometer land package that contains the Salina discovery, which is a silver, gold, lead, and zinc discovery. And it being in that part of the world, it should already make your bell ring that this is indeed a CRD type of mineralized system that has recently gotten a new porphyry target. So this is sort of the exciting part that actually got us talking here, where the company thinks that there is a copper porphyry buried below the ground about 3 kilometers away from the Butte Valley porphyry, and the target was identified using geophysics with a very similar mag high coming out of the results to what the Butte Valley porphyry shows on geophysics as well. This was, again, kind of a big geophysical discovery because the company had previously thought that the CRD type of mineralization that they were drilling off at their land package was sourced by that same Butte Valley porphyry, given its relative proximity to where they were drilling at. But again, this geophysical discovery has not sort of changed their mind. And I suppose in barbecue terms, if I had to explain it that way, Ridgeline's land package was already proven to contain a good barbecue flavor. They were drilling good grades over there, and everyone always thought it came from the bottle of barbecue sauce that's right next to the grill. But apparently, and this is the forward-looking part here, now there is a potential that the cook had mixed up his own barbecue sauce that he was adding to the rocks without anybody knowing, and so that's what the geophysics here tells them. So now Ridgeline wants to drill that assumed other barbecue sauce and see if that's actually driving the mineralization on there. And this will also be the focus of discussion today, the main focus, I assume. Quickly, before we move on to that discussion, though, there are, as I said, a few other targets, but again, this is a hybrid explorer, so they don't explore all of their targets. They don't have to spend money on all of their projects themselves. And there are 2 projects, specifically the Swift and the Black Ridge project, that are under a partnership, and they are both Carlin-type targets. They're respectively on the Battle Mountain and on the Carlin Trend, so also in Nevada. And they are, again, respectively under a $30 and a $10 million earn-in agreement, both of them with Nevada gold mines. There is one more Carlin-type target still in the same neighborhood of the Carlin Trend, also still close to one of Nevada gold mines' multi-million-ounce deposits, but there is no exploration agreement on this one as of yet, and no updates for a while, so I hope I'll be able to get an update on it later on in the conversation. And then lastly, but definitely not least, is the Big Blue, and that's the most recent addition to Ridgeline's portfolio here. It's still in Nevada, to the north from Salina. Actually, it's in Elko County, and it's coincidentally, for the ones paying attention to the barbecue show, it's close to another company that recently made its way through the barbecue arena, Silver. And if you do remember that interview from a few weeks ago, you'd also know that there is a past producing mine on Ridgeline's part of the project. It produced almost 100,000 pounds of copper at an average grade of over 6% of copper. That was over 100 years ago, though, with the primary exploration thesis being a porphyry skarn, copper, gold, and obviously silver mineralization, which is also thought or hoped to be sourced to be the source of that CRD mineralization on that Reina Silver's land package over there. So just how they first thought that the Butte Valley porphyry was feeding Salina, they think there is a porphyry beneath Big Blue that feeds Reina's Medicine Springs, I believe is called. Um, this is about the same size actually as Salina, so it's about 40 square kilometers, but there's also not much exploration. There hasn't been much exploration here over the last 100 years. So again, something I'm hoping to talk about further on in the conversation. But first things first, Chad, well, first of all, you look way smarter than I do, although that's not necessarily a compliment as you're about to figure out. But you also look kind of like my age, maybe a few years older. Why do you think you're the right man for the job? What is it exactly that you bring to the table here?
Well, you know, after the last few years, I think would make any CEO question if they're the right man for the job. The markets have been as rough as they have, but you know, I'm a technical focused CEO. So I'm originally started my career as a geologist. I had a lot of success working for you and Downey in the Premier Gold Mines, which is now I-80 Gold team. So really got to get a feel for what true discovery can do for a company and how it can really build actual real wealth. And so got really excited about you know, I think it was a part of 12 million ounces of discovery in Canada and down in Nevada as well, working for Premier Gold Mines over about an 9 year period. So got to be part of a really great team, worked my way up within that and kind of started getting a feel for the business side of the mining space. And Ewan started taking me on marketing tours, and I started doing a lot more work, you know, sitting in, getting just to sit in on meetings with banks and, you know, negotiating financings. And I wasn't part of that. You know, Ewan literally said, sit down, don't talk, just listen, you know, kind of thing. And it was great. So, you know, I got to see that side of the business, really started to enjoy it and realize that's what I wanted to be doing. So, you know, I think that, you know, past history of discovery and just really hungry to make more myself, I think makes me the right guy for the job.
Hmm. I appreciate that overview. Now that you're mentioning it, I interviewed Ewan about 2 weeks ago or something like that. So now that
Okay.
you're mentioning some of these things, they're starting to make more sense.
Yep.
And I do appreciate, Gio as a CEO, and you and I have had calls in sort of the middle of the night of your time. So I appreciate you being young and hungry, as you mentioned. But how does this strategy even mean? Like, what does it even mean for you to be hungry, given your sort of hybrid strategy, if you will, where you explore your own stuff, but then you have people exploring the other stuff. Talk
Yep.
to me more about that strategy.
Yeah, you know, so the business model actually started out as a pure explorer, right? Like in 2019, when we got off the ground, we were private, went public in 2020. Our focus from probably 2019 all the way through mid 2021 was purely focused on 100% owned, funding our own discoveries. And I think the market supported that, right? We were able to raise money at, you know, we IPO'd at 45 cents, and we raised another 4 million bucks at 50 cents in early 2021. That was the kind of market where we could actually fund our own projects, you know, and be a bit more aggressive. What we realized over time, though, was, you know, the market started tailing off in 2021, really took a nosedive into the fall. And we just realized, okay, we can't, there's not the support to be drilling, you know, 1,000 meter deep wildcat drill holes, you know, like purely speculative, right? Like it's not like in our Swift project or our Black Ridge project. We weren't drilling underneath existing mines, right? We were trying to find new grassroots discoveries. And, you know, we had technical success, but that didn't translate to market success, right? So it led to a change in the, or if you want to call it an evolution in the company's kind of business model. And that's where the hybrid explorer really kind of started taking off for us. So in the case of our Swift project, that was our first deal that we did with Nevada Gold Mines. And we were able to ink a $30 million US earn-in agreement for what would equate to 75% total ownership of the project if they hit all their spending and project milestones. In return, Ridgeline would get a 25% fully carried interest all the way to first gold pour.
Mm,
So what we tried to do is you know, bring in the kind of partners that aren't just going to make a discovery, but they're going to go and they're going to drill it, and then they can actually put it into production, right? So we've been very strategic about who we pick as our partners at our projects. So in the case of both Swift and Black Ridge, those are directly adjacent to the Cortez and Carlin gold complexes owned by Nevada Gold Mines, right? So why not pick a group that's obviously going to make, you know, can fold that into their existing operations and utilize all those synergies and make it a very profitable operation if you make a discovery. So we've tried to partner with those kind of groups on the gold side. So in that case, Nevada Gold Mines. And what it does is it allowed us to what we've been able to do is continue exploring our flagship Selena project, which I thought, like you said, we're going to get into in a little bit, but allowed us to really focus on Selena in a tough market, right? We didn't have the funds to be able to explore Blackridge, Swift, and Selena all at the same time. Now we've actually seen meaningful exploration being done at Swift, for example. There's been $7.5 million spent in 2 years US there by Nevada Gold Mines, all fully funded, and another $5 million is going in the ground just this year alone in drilling. So we hope they're on to what will hopefully be a major discovery, and if they do hit, we own a meaningful interest in that.
Well, you make a good point there when you said that you've pivoted the strategy and then you sort of corrected yourself to say that it's evolved. Which one is it? Like, is it a pivot? Like, are you going more towards sort of the prospect generating strategy, or is this an
Yeah.
evolution where you're going to keep managing both strategies at the same time for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think probably evolution is probably a more appropriate term, because the thing is as the markets shift, I can be aggressive in any direction, right? If it's truly awful, like the sentiment's been terrible, cost of capital for juniors has been incredibly high of late, and right now I'm gonna lean heavier on my partnerships, right? We're seeing total of 5.2 million US being spent by Nevada Gold Mines this year. If we were to just focus on, you know, low cost exploration at our 100% owned projects and let NGM put money in the ground, that's still one of the more aggressive programs that we've had as an exploration campaign, you know, for exploration dollars going in the ground in the history of the company, right? So we're trying, but, you know, at the same time, if the markets really turn and our stock were to turn around, for example, and things get going in the right direction, I can turn the exploration back on at our 100% owned projects. It's really just a function of trying to manage dilution and expectations, right? Like, you know, when the markets are great, yeah, I'm going to raise more money. I'm going to get more aggressive at our Big Blue and Selena projects, and I hope that we will deliver 100% discovery. That still is truly the core of the company, is delivering a major discovery to our shareholders. But when times are tough, I think you need to be nimble,
Hmm.
and a refusal not, you know, to just continue pushing, you know, and hoping for different results. I think in a tough market, doesn't do our shareholders any justice either. So
Yeah, fair point. That's well, that's something you have to again sort of keep managing over the years, and I hope that works out well for you. I do want to talk about some of the 100% own projects, specifically about the most recent news, what you've been um, doing more recently, specifically this porphyry target that I mentioned at the
yeah,
beginning. And as far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a mag high, right? It's a geophysical target. But if I understand correctly, those don't necessarily have to be porphyries.
yep.
So I know you probably don't want to start with a what if not question, but what if this is not a porphyry? Like, what do you
So
think the
let's
mag
start with the
high
tough
could
one.
be? Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you're absolutely right, right? Like geophysics is only a tool in the toolbox. It is not definitive, right? Even an IP, you get a good IP chargeability high, which is always kind of the classic go-to for a porphyry. That doesn't mean it's a porphyry. It just suggests that there's potential there's a porphyry there, right? So what if it's not a big porphyry sitting there underneath Selena? Well, it would just, we'd be right back where we were with Selena, you know, middle of 2023, which was, we believed we have an excellent CRD discovery with our chinchilla oxide, which is an outcropping oxide CRD discovery. Kind of almost think of like, if you think of like the original Clark, I think they're Hermosa, they used to call it Hermosa, I think they call it Clark at the Taylor deposit. That was
Mm.
originally just a low grade open pit silver, manganese, and lead deposit, right? Outcropping, shallow. And it wasn't until they drilled a couple kilometers down dip of that at depth to back towards the porphyry that they made the major Taylor discovery there in Arizona. That's what we're targeting now, right? So we've drilled a whole bunch of holes, almost 50 holes across the project, most of them in chinchilla oxide. We have 2 holes out in the valley in between that Butte Valley porphyry that you mentioned, which we originally think is the source. We've got 2 holes out there that both hit high grade CRD mineralization over narrower intercepts. So we know we need to drill more holes. We need to drill them deeper. So yeah, if it's not a porphyry, we go back to, hey, this could still be another pretty significant CRD discovery, and we just need to test it more. But if there's a porphyry there, I think one, it shows an even stronger potential for a large porphyry slash CRD system. But I would love to tag into, you know, a copper tungsten discovery around the chinchilla or the Selena porphyry area as well. I mean, we have some high grade. We've hit high grade tungsten and copper beneath the chinchilla oxide zone that we drilled in 2023, up to percent copper and 3.5% tungsten over narrow intercepts,
Hmm.
which suggests, okay, you have, you know, anywhere from half a meter to a meter. We have a porphyry system that's plumbing this whole thing could that be the Salina porphyry? So there's kind of a few ways this exploration could go. Frankly, either way it goes, still a success for us. But I do like the addition of that Salina target, or the porphyry
Help
target.
help me better understand it geologically though, because it is something, and the geophysical anomaly looks big, right?
Yep.
If it's not a porphyry, is it alteration shooting off from Butte? Could it be that far out, or what else is on your bingo card?
Well, that's a good question, and again, even though I'm supposed to be, I am trained in this, I'd be speculating as well, right? Because you can't see under the ground and be sure. But probably the most likely scenarios is if it's not a porphyry, it's probably we know there's a dike swarm, which would just be a bunch of intrusive dikes that are intruding up all these northwest striking faults that run right through our chinchilla zone.
Hmm.
Those could just continue propagating down to the southeast, and they actually cut right through where that Salina porphyry anomaly is. So could that be a spot where just those dikes kind of blow out into a slightly larger zone, and maybe there's a lot of alteration surrounding it? That could explain it, right? It could certainly be something like that. Now, the fact that it's over 2 kilometers long and a kilometer wide, that's a pretty darn big dike swarm, right? So for me, I would think that it probably does lend to there being more of an actual larger body of intrusive there, or a porphyry. But it could certainly be something like that, or it could be a massive fault zone as well that could
Hmm.
potentially cause that anomaly. So
If it's another intrusive body, that doesn't necessarily have to be mineralized, or is it because there's a mag high that there's definitely something in there?
it doesn't have to be mineralized. Yeah. So we actually have multiple phases of intrusions that are known in the Butte Valley and Salina area. So there's everything from Jurassic to Cretaceous age, which are the two main mineralizing events in the area. But then you also have all the way down to Tertiary, which is, let's say, 30, 40 million year old mineralization. So there's over 100 million years of continuous porphyry, if you want to call it that, or intrusive activity that's been going on in the area, and not all of them are mineralized. So the question is the proximity of this porphyry anomaly that we see at the Salina porphyry is so close to the chinchilla oxide zone, which is showing copper tungsten at depth. That to us says, okay, all of these things lining up would suggest that that copper tungsten has to be coming from somewhere, and it probably isn't coming from Butte Valley because that's 4 kilometers away. And copper and tungsten are both high temperature minerals. They're not happy. They're not happy in solution to travel very far from their porphyry source, right? And once the fluids cool off, copper, tungsten, those kind of minerals, they drop out. So the fact that we're seeing that kind of high temperature mineralization 4 kilometers away from what we thought was our porphyry source suggested, okay, there probably is a different source that we're unaware of. That's what led to the larger mag survey, and it's what led to this identification of this larger porphyry. So it does, you could say it all papers out. We just got to go prove it now.
Hmm. Would it be unusual for that to happen, like for there to be sort of clustered porphyries that close to each other? Would that be unusual for Nevada?
No, that would actually be typical. So porphyry systems in general tend to form as clusters. You'll see it globally. I mean, think of even like Filo de Sol or all the NGX discoveries that are happening now. Of course, please, shareholders, I'm not saying this is Filo de Sol or NGX. We'll put a little disclaimer there. But what you do see typically is these systems are long lived. They have multiple pulses. Sometimes multiple pulses of the porphyries coming up are all mineralized, and sometimes it's just one. So it's trying to understand, every system's a little bit different. But yeah, you'd say that the fact that we're seeing Butte Valley, the Salina porphyry now as a major target, and we know that Freeport, who owns is earning into the Butte Valley area, the Butte Valley project. I should have mentioned that before. But Freeport spent about 10 million bucks last year drilling the Butte Valley porphyry. So clearly they think there's a deep, very meaningful porphyry system at Butte Valley. And I just found out that they've more than doubled their land position and staked another 13,000 roughly acres in 2024. So I think they're seeing a clustering system as well in the Butte Valley area as well. And I think it ties in nicely with what we see at Salina.
Hmm. Thank you for mentioning sort of the forward-looking statements there. I joke about this and say that geologists are literally
Yeah,
people running around the world looking for hidden treasures in the ground. They typically
yeah.
get excited and say forward-looking stuff.
A lot,
Um,
a lot, a lot of arm waving going on here. Yeah, yeah.
well, the people who found Butte Valley, how did they miss this anomaly? Like, well, why didn't they come and take your pack? I mean, or take over that package and drill it?
Well, it's funny. I think you know, evolution has changed a lot, or evolution, geez, I got that word stuck in my head. Exploration has changed a lot over the last 20, 30 years. And the original Butte Valley discovery, it was in, I think, the late 60s, right?
Hmm.
So very, companies were using very typical regional scale geophysics, right? And so that what happened was, I think that the regional scale geophysics, they do a great job of picking out Butte Valley, the Robinson mine to the south, which is a billion-ton copper porphyry on the same trend. But what they don't do is they don't pick out the smaller anomalies. And so, for example, when we ran the mag survey at Salina, we ran lines across the original Butte Valley porphyry as well, so we could get like a baseline, if you want to call it that, but like a magnetic signature or a ID of what the Butte Valley porphyry looks like. We then use that to look for other signatures at Salina.
Okay.
And it actually took some pretty detailed processing with our geophysical team to kind of highlight the Salina porphyry because it's close enough to Butte Valley, which has such a massive, think of like, it's tough to explain, I guess. I'm trying to think of like, it's almost like an overprint. There's the magnetic signature is so strong at Butte Valley that it overprints everything else around it, right? So unless you're kind of able to kind of, it's like trying to, see through the smoke to kind of see the smaller anomalies. So what we actually did is some advanced processing, which looked at the bigger picture anomaly, which showed, okay, there's the Butte Valley porphyry, and then 4 kilometers away, you have the Salina porphyry, but it's much more subtle. And then we actually reprocessed the data again once we'd actually identified the Salina porphyry, and we removed all of the data points that surrounded Butte Valley. So we could kind of minimize that noise. And then that allowed us to focus in on Salina and get higher resolution on the Salina porphyry. So if you weren't like specifically looking for something in the Salina area, it wouldn't have come, lit up on a typical porphyry company's radar back in the 1970s.
Okay, so if I had to redo it in barbecue terms, it'd sort of be like there's one barbecue who we know is there for sure, but it
Yeah,
has like a very thick smoke.
yeah,
And then you've sort of done a heat picture, what do you call a thermal picture? And then you see that there's maybe a heat source, but you cannot see through the smoke, so you don't know if it's another barbecue, but it could be.
yeah.
That's sort of how I imagine it.
That's a pretty good way to put it, actually. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, no. So, I mean, I guess if you're looking for the big porphyry, that's still Butte Valley. That is the big guy, right?
Mm.
But if you're looking for the clusters, there's more than just Butte Valley and sitting around there. And I think that's what we found now is we have one of those clusters, and I think it's all tied into one big system, right? So, without the Butte Valley porphyry being right beside us, I doubt we'd have the exciting opportunity we have for the CRD discovery at Salina, because I think it is pumping mineralization into our side of the project. But
Mm.
if you have the Salina porphyry as well, it's probably overprinting and pushing even more fluids in from the other direction as well. And you just get call it enrichment of your mineralizing system when you have multiple porphyries overlapping each other.
Hmm. I do want to talk about how the entire uh, the entire region there is sort of being created, or how you see it developing over time. But let's something that you just mentioned, maybe think about it. Let's maybe flip it around and say that you are like the anomaly here seems that you are right. So not the what if not, but the what if.
Yeah.
Um, and this anomaly is a porphyry. The anomaly seems close to your sort of southwestern border, if I'm not mistaken. Based on the
Yep.
structural controls that you're seeing, could the mineralization on actually sort of materialize mostly outside of your property's boundaries, or where would the porphyry have sent the mineral? I sound very stupid here because I am, but I think you get the question.
No, I got you. I was following you the whole way. No, yeah, we think that there is a large portion of the mineralization on the property has formed outside the property and then been pushed by the Butte Valley porphyry, right? Think of like when these porphyries are pumping up, right? You're displacing, billions of tons of rock to intrude a porphyry up into an existing body of rock, right? So you're creating a huge amount of pressure and suction. Then on top of that, you're pumping, billions of gallons of fluids, which are then being heated up by that porphyry, right? And it's creating actual like convection cells, like where you're actually getting, pressurized fluids that are then getting pushed out around those fluids are pushing on along any fault, any fracture, any crack in the rock that'll take that fluid, it'll push its way through it. So you're seeing a huge amount of fluids that are being pushed out for anywhere. You can see on average, like up to 10 kilometers of alteration halos surrounding big porphyry systems, right? Like if you go to like Bingham Canyon in Utah, that's for like 10, 12 kilometers, you're seeing scattered deposits of different mineralization styles that all emanated from that original porphyry system. So we think a lot of that's happening here too, right? We think Butte Valley is the main kind of the heart of it. That's where the majority of the mineralization was probably pumping out. But at some point, whether it was at the same time, slightly later, we're not sure. We think that a big chunk of porphyry actually, whether it came up another fault zone at depth or something, it popped up right underneath Salina as well. And
Okay.
so we call those like a cupola zone or a smaller chunk of a larger porphyry. So we think they're all intimately related, probably the same age. They seem to be the same composition, both Butte Valley and the dikes that we see at that outcrop of surface and that we've drilled. They're of the same general age and composition as the Butte Valley porphyry. So these things are both very connected, right?
Okay.
So yes, mineralization formed outside the project. At the same time, we have this porphyry forming right on the project itself, and I think it's all connected. So to try to, yeah, it's none of this is all happening in a vacuum, I guess. So like when you look at it, obviously the property boundary never mattered, right? It's just some arbitrary boundary that we put in, 100 million years after all this formed. And it's all part of one big system.
Hmm.
That's what
Is
we're
that how,
starting to understand.
is that how old it is? 100 million years?
Yeah, it's about 100 and I think about 100 million
Okay.
years. Yeah.
Good. Based on that previous thesis of yours, what are sort of the differences between, again, sort of go back to the structural controls here. What are the
Yeah.
differences between the structural control? Like, are the structural controls present to respond to both the old and the new thesis?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the beauty of it is we have a large thrust fault system. So you're seeing an east verging thrust fault. So essentially low angle fault structures during a compressional event during the formation of the Great Basin. Much older than the Carlin age mineralization, but you essentially have everything squishing together. And when
Hmm.
you have big bodies of rock squishing together, you're going to have some plates of rock sliding over other plates of rock. And that's what we have. We have a thrust fault package. So you're just seeing right from the Butte Valley porphyry all the way across our project. There's a whole bunch of low angle thrust faults that are sliding over top the main body of rock. And those are that's a major plumbing feature for the entire, both for Butte Valley and for Salina. We've seen it in drilling, we see it in outcrop. Pretty confident that that's a major control. But what's really interesting is that thrust fault actually slides over top of the Salina porphyry anomaly. So all of the, we're talking about roughly 3,000 feet of rock, 2,000 feet of rock that slides over top of that magnetic anomaly. And if you actually look at our 3D slides we put out in our press release, that one slide shows that you have that thrust fault and it cuts off the top of the Salina porphyry anomaly. And the actual magnetic anomaly actually kind of mirrors being dragged along that thrust feature. So we think it's all very tied together and yeah, it's pretty exciting. I think it's a really good target and really just comes down to, properly testing it at this point.
Would you have had to seen the same alteration already, or like what was the mineralogy of the alteration? The drill holes coming closer to the supposed here to the porphyry.
Yeah, what's interesting is we're actually starting to see what you call endoskarn. So when we were starting to intersect QFP, which is quartz feldspar porphyry, which is the composition of Butte Valley porphyry, it's also the composition of what we believe the Salina porphyry is going to be as well. When we intersected those in drilling, we actually started seeing weakly formed endoskarn, which is skarn mineralization, high temperature, essentially the rocks being cooked, and you're getting formation of garnets magnetite, all that kind of stuff with typical skarn mineralogy. And that's what we're actually starting to see in the dikes and sills themselves, which is a sign that we're actually getting closer to the heat source. Whereas when you drill up higher in the chinchilla oxide near the surface, you don't see those kind of mineral assemblages, right? You're seeing a classic CRD, but you get down at depth and you're starting to see the heat pick up, which supports, hey, that's the Salina porphyry is both about a kilometer to the southeast, but also about 600 meters down deeper than you'd see the chinchilla oxide zone. So,
Have you been able to look at some of the documentation on the Butte Valley porphyry? Because I couldn't find much of it easily available, so I couldn't look into too much. Is that the same fingerprint that you're seeing there?
yeah, so that's the beauty of it is we know the underlying owners of Butte Valley pretty well. So that's Falcon Butte Minerals, and long before they did a deal with Freeport-McMoRan, we were pretty collaborative back in 2020, 2021. We talked quite a bit, looked at each other's core, shared ideas on the geologic models and stuff. So we've been able to get a pretty good idea. We've seen their drill core. We've seen what the porphyry looks like at Butte Valley at depth over 3,000 feet down. we had drill holes that they were able to show us. So we got a lot of good information from that group that really helped us kind of help build that model as it's come together here.
Hmm. How's the I'm basically trying to figure out like how's the fingerprint of the one porphyry versus what you think here's a porphyry and whether that checks out.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, talk to me about the about mineralization here. In
Yeah,
terms of like the
it's
grades.
Yeah, it's really tough too. So like the tough thing about Butte Valley is it's completely undercover, right? You don't even get into the porphyry till you're a few thousand feet down. So it's a very deep target. So unfortunately, most like all of Butte Valley is undercover, and 75% of the Salina target, it would be undercover as well, right? So we don't have any, outcropping. If you want to say it, like we can't just walk up and say, hey, here's a porphyry at surface. This is what it looks like. What we know at Salina, what we've drilled, the limited drilling we have, we're starting to get some skarn formation, right? We're getting tungsten and copper, right, along with that endoskarn, which is a very key indicator of, okay, this is porphyry related, and we're closer to the heat source than we were when we were drilling the chinchilla oxide. Now, when you go over to Butte Valley, their mineral, if you want to call it their fingerprint that they have there, it is a copper, gold, silver, tungsten, and lead and zinc porphyry, which it's truly a trash can, right? Like I think if you look at our deck, we have some of the old intercepts. I think it's about 30 around like BV 14 hit about 35 meters or something like that of about 0.2% copper, 0.1 gold, a bit of silver, bit of lead, a bit of zinc, no tungsten in that intercept, but it is a tungsten copper skarn at Butte Valley as well. So there's a lot of similarities, I guess you could say, in the metal assemblages, but they haven't hit a big CRD discovery yet at Butte Valley that I know of. Whereas at Salina, we do have some pretty material intercepts that hold their own as a CRD discovery. But if we can throw a porphyry in there as well, it'll be even better.
Just a little porphyry, yeah. I'm sorry when you mentioned that it truly looks like a trash can. You kind of sounded like my wife when she looks at my closet. So kind of
Fair.
distracted her. What about the
Yep.
continuity of the mineralization on as you move to different parts of the property? Are you seeing better continuity at one spot relative to the other?
Yeah, we definitely see exceptional continuity in the first. So when we pretty much punch through, there's call it a package of shales, which kind of overlie the chinchilla oxide discovery. And our host rock is the Gilmet limestone. So the first, call it, I'm switched between metric and imperial here pretty regularly, so forgive me. But we see the first 100 meters of the Gilmet limestone is a really nice debris flow limestone, mineralizes very strongly. And we tend to see anywhere from 30 to 60 meter thick zones of CRD style mineralization in that first 100 meters. That's certainly the strongest. What's really exciting though is when we drilled beneath chinchilla oxide this year, the whole goal was can we drill 1,500 feet beneath the discovery and prove there's even more host rocks, and we were able to do that. So we drilled all the way down to through the Gilmet formation, which is about 1,500 feet thick. And in total, we proved that there's over 1,700 feet of prospective carbonate host rocks. Hole 50 or hole 49 bottomed in mineralization. The actual last sample ran, I think, 80 grams per ton silver. And had some lead and zinc in it as well. So we hit stacked zones of narrower mineralization all the way through the Gilmet, but the best continuity so far has been in that first 100 meters or so. But we do strongly believe that as we drill closer to the Butte Valley porphyry, that we're going to hit into a stronger part of the system. And the reason being is these porphyries tend to zone out in a very specific manner. So worldwide, you'll see copper porphyries go from a copper porphyry at its core. Then they'll have a rind, if you want to call it that, of high-grade skarn mineralization typically around it. Those can be highly irregular. Then that transitions to CRD, a couple kilometers away from the porphyry. And by the time you get 3 to 5 kilometers away from that porphyry, you can be into more like disseminated gold, silver, that kind of mineralization. So you can actually call it, when you're talking about fingerprints, you can actually, there's like a blueprint to chasing these things at a district scale. And so what we're drilling at Chinchilla Oxide, that's kind of the outer edges of what would be the oxide, kind of the oxidizing system as it's transitioning to more gold rich, which we do see. By the time you're 7 kilometers away, you're at our broken egg target, which is a gold only target that we've drilled, hit okay results, but not good enough to have us continue chasing it. But it shows that continuation of the system. When we step back towards Butte Valley, we're going the opposite direction. We're right in that sweet spot for where a CRD should form. And if you were to look at For example, the Taylor deposit, I always refer to it, but why not? It's one of the best, so we'll refer to that one. But they're about 2 kilometers away from the Sunnyside Porphyry, right?
Hmm.
So the Sunnyside Porphyry, which is owned by Barksdale, um, it's a classic copper porphyry discovered in the 1960s by Asarco. And then you get 2 kilometers onto South 32's ground, and you're into a world-class CRD, right? And that's that correct. You're seeing the right temperature, the right pressure away from that porphyry for fluids to mineralize a high-grade silver, lead, zinc system. Whereas you get closer to the porphyry, it goes higher temperature and it goes to more copper rich. So in a very, sorry, I'm getting a bit down a rabbit hole here, but in the technical side, but really what we're seeing is when you talk about a fingerprint or I said a blueprint, that's what we're using is trying to identify, okay, if we know that the top 100 meters of the Gilmet is our most prospective unit, we also know we probably need to be 2 kilometers farther to the west to get into that perfect sweet spot for being right beside the Beat Valley Porphyry. Maybe that's where we're going to get everything connected, line up, and you're going to end up with a 50 to 60 meter thick zone, but much higher grade and sulfide is kind
Hmm.
of the goal trying to target. So
Much higher grade. Does that mean more or less grade variability the closer you get to a potential porphyry?
well, I think when we get for what we're seeing, we just believe that that chinchilla sulfide is or chinchilla oxide, which is 4 kilometers away from Butte Valley. We've always felt that okay, we're just on the edges of it's kind of almost I think of like as the system is starting to weaken, that's where we are hitting chinchilla oxide, and we've drilled one hole right in the heart of the chinchilla sulfide target, and we drilled it in 2022, right in the middle of an ugly market, and we hit a 25-meter thick zone of CRD alteration with up to 3 meters of 600 grams silver equivalent, with some of the highest grade zinc and some of the highest grade gold, up to 3 grams gold and 7% zinc in that intercept individually. And that was right where we expected it to be, but we couldn't drill the hole deeper because our rig bottomed out, right? Then we ran out of money. We put out the news announcing that we had a 2.5 kilometer step out from our original discovery, and it hit, and our stock went down 20%. So
Hmm.
at that point, you kind of sit back and you go, okay, I'm not going to go chucking more money into these deep holes until the market's going to appreciate a better chance of appreciating those intercepts, right? And I think we're getting close to that time now. I think the sentiment's turning, and it's time to start testing some of these deeper targets and hopefully prove that theory.
How deep of a targets are we talking about? Because he said Butte is rather deep. It's covered.
Okay.
How deep do you want to drill?
That's the crazy thing. Like, so Freeport is drilling up to 2,000-meter drill holes was the target when they started drilling this year, is my understanding, right? So Butte Valley's a very deep target. We project somewhere in the 1,000 to 1,200-meter range. We'll fully test through our target, that's no joke, right? Those are expensive holes, talking $600,000 to $700,000 per drill hole just to test an idea.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's yeah, that's not cheap.
it's not cheap.
Um,
US dollars too, right? We raise in Canadian, and then we get a 30% haircut converting to US dollars,
yep.
and then you put yeah. So it isn't cheap. It's just why we're assessing how do we proceed from here, right? Do we bring in a partner to drill these incredibly deep and still risky holes? Possibly, we're assessing that as an option, but this thing is our flagship project, and if we're going to do a deal, it's going to have to be the right deal to move the company forward.
Well, this is sort of a get rich or die trying situation where if you drill one hole on your own money and it happens to be right, down the guts of the system and it's that porphyry that you hope it to be, well, you're gonna get massively rewarded. But if it's not there, then you just wasted a bunch of money.
That's yeah, and it's tough, right? Like that's the thing that my wife, who's again, she's much smarter than me as well. She made a point one day, I was pretty frustrated about how the company was doing. Just the stock had been, stock had been trading. Market sentiment was rough, and she made a point. She said, you've only ever raised enough money to be lucky. You haven't raised enough money to be good. And she was like, "What? How did you make all those discoveries working for Premier Gold Mines?" And I was like, "Well, you and always made sure that I had, you know, a ridiculous amount of cash to always make sure that we were always drilling, right? That's the only way you're actually truly going to advance the discovery. And what we've, with the markets taking a major turn here, we've only raised enough money to be lucky. We haven't raised enough money to be good. So, I think our team's doing exceptional work. And, the fact that we've been able to attract majors to our project shows that we have quality projects and good deals. But I'm looking to, part of the reason of bringing on partners was because I wanted to just be good, right? Bring in the right teams, do good exploration, and have the persistence to push through maybe mediocre results to hit that big discovery, right? Like very rarely do you see, like a Hercules silver type scenario, right? Where the first hole tags into a conceptual target and it's just incredible. That doesn't happen very much, right? So super happy for the Hercules guys. I know Chris well. It's a great thing for them. But that's not what happens for most juniors. And so what we're trying to do is, can we raise enough money? Obviously, you need to get a little lucky. I think most big discoveries, you'll talk to geos and stuff, and they'll say, "Yeah, you know, we this wasn't even our favorite target or whatever, right?" But we want to bring in the right partners so that we can make sure that we can push through that barrier, make that big discovery. And if Ridgeline only owns, let's say, 25% of a discovery, I'd rather have that than try to go for broke and end up blowing out the company structure and missing, right? So it's a constant balance. I mean, it depends. It's a battle every time. It depends on the project. It depends on the depth to target. I think all of those factors apply to how we attack a project, and that decides, do we bring in a partner, do we do it ourselves? So yeah.
Nobody cares or should care about my opinion, but I'm going to share it anyways because that's sort of what I've been saying over the last year or so is that those kind of like 100% of nothing is still not better than 25% of something, right? And I've been saying it specifically for one company that I put my own money in, that being Awali Resources, and that's currently working out under a comparable structure. Now they're the operator, whatever, longer story there, but it's I like where this is going, and actually, well, maybe we can talk about that too. But what kind of a structure would that be if you bring on a partner? Like, are you going to keep operating it with the thesis and the knowledge that you've put into it, or are they
Right.
going to take it away from you and they're going to operate it?
Well, and again, I think it depends on every project. So in the case of Swift and Black Ridge, these are projects right beside Nevada Gold Mines projects that Barrick and Newmont collectively, the two partners in that joint venture, they've owned for 50 years. Both of those groups had more institutional knowledge of the project we owned than we did. So in that case, it made sense. Okay, let's bring on a partner. They can run it. They can move it forward from here. At a project like Selena or Big Blue, we would see it as the opposite. We've found these projects, we've kind of built them up from neither Big Blue or Selena or discoveries are even on people's radar before we pick them up. So we feel like we have the knowledge base that if we did deals on either project, we'd want to see us being the operator and moving it forward. And we're not looking at doing a deal on every one of our projects, right? Like we honestly, like, we're pretty happy where we're at right now. And I want to make sure that we're always offering 100% upside to our shareholders alongside our deals, right? I kind of view like Swift and Black Ridge as lottery tickets. They cost our shareholders nothing.
Hmm.
But a major discovery could have a return. If NGM drills a great hole at Swift, I could see an Awale type response, right? We have a 25% free carry. I believe Awale has a 20% free carry. And we're obviously in a great jurisdiction right beside a 23 million ounce gold mine. So I do see that kind of torque potential, and it's essentially zero cost to our shareholders at this point. So I think they're
Hmm.
good deals. Yeah.
Is there, well, is it a zero cost for holding them actually? Do you have to pay any like land holding fees or something else?
No, there's zero project level cost. So I guess when I say there's no cost at all, that's probably, we have to obviously keep the company afloat, paid, G&A, et cetera, and all that. But yeah, there's zero project level cost associated with any of our deals. So when I say it's a free carry, it truly is a true free carry until production.
Right. Is there a desire for Helena, for Selena? Is it interest in there? Like are other companies reaching out, wanting to look at the internal data that you have, stuff like that?
Yeah, we've had multiple expressions of interest from large parties that want to get exposure to Nevada. And I think what we've, and any good discovery is going to have, pretty much all of these majors have generative teams, and their only job is to keep their ear to the ground, make sure that they know about every potential opportunity happening in the Western U.S., for example, right? So does it mean because a group signed a CA or takes a site tour, does it mean they're doing a deal? Absolutely not. But it does show that, hey, Selena now ranks as a project of interest with major companies, right? They're flagging it as something they should keep an eye on, and I think that's exciting. And in my experience with doing deals with NGM and stuff like that, in multiple deals with Premier before that. These folks, they're when they're interested and stuff, and we've definitely had some interested groups. But this is our flagship project, right? So we're pretty excited about it. If we do a deal, it's going to be a deal that meaningfully moves it forward for us.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
what happens at Salina in 2024 depends on where you go from here corporately, or do you already have at least a bare minimum that you want to see getting done this year?
Yeah, if we were doing our own exploration this year, I want to see an MT survey. So that was a survey that at the Taylor deposit worked exceptionally well for chasing the deep sulfide mineralization. And I think that's where we're at our Chinchilla sulfide target. It's a deep target. It's about 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers long, and over 3 kilometers wide at this point, where we've got, alteration and 2 drill holes kind of loosely bracketing where the target is. That is far too large of a target to go spend at this point. Still very hard to come by shareholder dollars to pretty much throw Hail Marys down, right? So I would want to do an MT survey, try to narrow that targeting down to hey, within this 200-meter wide by a kilometer long area is we think is prospective, and we need to put holes through that, right? Just try to get a better efficiency on our drilling. So that would be something we'd like to do this year, and I think that'll hopefully hone in on those sulfide targets right beside B Valley, and it'd be enough. I think it'd be a good visual as well for the markets to be like, hey, this is exciting. Here's why we think this needs to be drilled, and we're raising the capital to do it.
How much money is that going to cost, the MT?
That's about 250,000 US.
What do you have left in the bank right now? Less than 1 million?
Yes. So we'd obviously have to raise before we go do that, right? So yeah, any exploration work that we do this year moving forward would have to come off the backs of a raise for sure. I'm not saying that's coming anytime soon, but when the time's right, we think the market's turning nicely here. We'll raise a little bit and make sure that we can keep moving things forward.
Do you have people sort of lining up to give you money? Might be too much to say, but within your network or people that you know, like if I have to raise, let's say just a little bit of money, like $1 million to do this survey and go through the year, is that money going to be easy to find?
I think maybe easy isn't the right word, because in this market, nothing's been easy, but we have some incredible shareholders. Guys, we have folks like Rick Rule, Paul Stevens that you mentioned, EMX Royalty Corp's been backing us the whole way along. Couple really good, and then a couple groups of just really good shareholders that have been backing us since we were private. And what I've found is I've tried to stay very honest with that core group of shareholders, honest with all my shareholders, but I'm try to be very clear about what we've been trying to do from the start. And we've delivered these deals. We've had a discovery at Salina that just hasn't hit at the market level yet, but we think it will. And so they're continuing to back us. So if I came out and said, hey, I want to raise $1 million, I don't see that as being something that would be very difficult to do. I just want to make sure that if I'm raising that money at these levels, that it's going to be meaningful for the stock, right? That it's going to actually move the company forward.
Sure.
Yeah.
But when you say moving the company forward, I'm also reminded of something that I was thinking about. Like, what if, and we're still staying within the what if realm, but what if this strategy, what if this target works out? As in, if you did find a new porphyry there, what would that mean in regards to your relationship with your neighbors, with Falcon and Freeport?
That would be pretty material for us, right? So Freeport, we've spoken with them. They're great, their team, and they kind of said, go find some copper and we'll talk, right? Like we've said, hey, here's our CRD target, silver, lead, zinc, and they're like, yeah, well, we don't mind that, and they're very upfront about it. And they said, but go find some meaningful copper intercepts, and we'd be really excited. So I think that yeah, if we were to prove that theory, it would open up a whole different type of company and scale a company that would be interested in Salina for sure.
I believe initially you were also targeting a resource by the end of this year, but I also assume that's being pushed back now that you have this target, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think that so if the chinchilla oxide was our only target, then I think we'd be just steadily moving it towards a resource. We think that we can target somewhere between a 50 and 100 million ounces of silver that are open pitable at the chinchilla oxide zone. It outcrops. We've drilled material intercepts. I mean, chinchilla oxide isn't a throwaway by any stretch, but when you factor in chinchilla sulfide and now the Salina porphyry targets, we have to understand those targets before we spend any money moving our tertiary target on the project, our third best target, which would be chinchilla oxide towards a resource, right? We want to see a major sulfide discovery, CRD at Chinchilla sulfide or porphyry come together at Salina porphyry. Either one of those are game changers for the company, and I think that's where our money should be focused.
Right. Okay. Fair point. I think we've talked a lot about Selena. I know you almost have to go here. So let's just maybe quickly talk about the partner projects. Both
Yep.
of them in Nevada, both under agreement with Nevada Gold Mines. Uh, why is that? What are they seeing into those projects to make them keep on putting money in? Are they gonna keep putting money into it this year? Like, tell me all about that.
Yeah, so the actually it's interesting. Both projects were originally Black Ridge was owned by Newmont for like 20, 30 years. It's, only a couple kilometers from the Gold Strike open pit, right? But it's in the mountainside instead of on the valley floor, which is the Gold Strike pit. So two different areas, Newmont had it. They ended up doing very little with it over about 20, 30 years. They always felt it was too deep. And so they dropped it, right? Same thing for Black Ridge or Swift. That was owned as part of the Barrick, I think they call it their Barrick joint venture, the Cortez joint venture, which used to be Placer Dome 20, 30 years ago. And they owned all of Swift, right? Did zero drilling on it, um, and and kind of just held it as part of a larger regional land consolidation. And then when Barrick started, struggling with cash flow and restructuring kind of a lot of their exploration focus, they ended up dropping the project back in 2016. So these were both projects that are part of key trends that just got forgotten about over the years. And so we were able to pick them up, reconsolidate the land positions. We drilled early stage programs at both projects, drill programs. And what we did is we didn't hit significant drill intercepts. We proved in both cases that the right host rocks that host these same 20, 30 million ounce deposits, well, they're altered, maybe not mineralized with gold, but they're altered and directly on front of these major mines. So that's what was able to come in and they were both deep programs, right? We spent millions of dollars to drill a total of, I think, 5 holes across both projects, right? We spent about $4 million. So very expensive, very risky. And we realized, okay, these holes are deep, probably deeper than we're willing to risk raising and spending the capital on ourselves. So we went to NGM and said, look, we'd like to bring you on as partners. Here's the opportunity. And they agreed. They felt that the opportunity was the same. And since Mark Bristow's come on, their exploration focus has dramatically changed, right? So they're now more focused on greenfields exploration and willing to take some risk as well. So that was a kind of timing, I guess, was kind of perfect, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And they operate the project now. That's the 25% free carry to first pour as well, or how does that work?
So how it works is there's initial earn-ins for both projects. So at Swift, it's $20 million for 60%, operated by Nevada Gold Mines, and it's all or nothing. So they either spend $20 million and they get 60, they spend 17 and a half and get it back. We get all of the data from that project, and 100% of it back, right? So it really is, it's a truly all or nothing deal. Same as at Black Ridge, but it's only 4.5 million to earn that initial 60% instead of the 20. Reason being, Swift is, I think, about 5 or 6 times larger land position than our Black Ridge project. So it's more of just a size thing, right? But so they're operating both projects, and then there's a series of staged earn-ins, cash payments, and spending requirements for NGM to make at both projects, which would get them to a total of 75% ownership at either project. In which case, if they hit that 75, it's an immediate 25% free carry for Ridgeline all the way to
Right.
gold pour. So a lot of people think of free carry as, NGM is just, they just front the money for all of it and it just goes off and poof into space. No, what they do is they set up a loan facility for Ridgeline. We essentially can draw from a credit facility that's managed by Nevada Gold Mines. They would get interest on that loan, and then they recoup that loan on first gold pour on an 80-20 basis. So if we own 25% on first gold pour, 80% of that 25% would go to NGM to pay back our loan, right? But it's a cash flowing asset on day one, and we never have to put any cash into it to get to that point. So I think that's where the big win is.
Right. Any news flow? I mean, is that how far of that process are they again?
Well, they spent 7.5 million across both projects, about 7 million just at Swift alone. They'll have
Hmm.
spent $13 million by the end of this year just at Swift. So
Right.
they're not even through they're about call it 70% of the way through their first earn in at Swift, and they're only about 10% of the way into their first earn in at Black Ridge.
Okay, because that's exactly what I was going to ask, is that they probably have to start ramping it up
Yes.
soon, which for you potentially means more news flow.
Yes, that's what's exciting is the first few years are kind of them just doing they call it framework drilling, getting to know the project, drilling specific holes to test certain geologic ideas. Now what they're doing is they're ramping up exploration to go really target making that big discovery. They've now spent pretty serious money on the project, and I believe all indications point that they still believe it's a very very exciting target, which is why they're putting 5 million into it this year. But they do need to ramp up that spending, or else they won't hit their timeline by the 5 year mark.
How does that news flow actually work though? Because they're well, they're supposed to report what's material, but what's material to you might not be material to them in some cases.
Yeah, we were that's why each deal took almost 8 months to negotiate, respectively. And the reason being is we held really firm on the point that until NGM spends $20 million at Swift, for example, Ridgeline's the 100% owner, right? So we actually decide what's material to the
Okay.
project, right? Because it's our shareholders that own this project until NGM spends $20 million. So we actually have a full data sharing agreement. They've been wonderful to work with, by the way. It's never been like an experience where we felt like they've been wanting to withhold information. But the way it's set up is we get quarterly data dumps from them. We can then put together a press release on what we feel is a relevant update on the project, which we do quite regularly whenever there's active exploration. And then NGM gets a week to review it. They provide they provide edits. Usually it's maybe I'm being a little too forward looking as a junior CEO, and they'll edit my quote down or something like that. But that's been fine to work with them on that kind of stuff, but it allows us to be pretty upfront with our shareholders.
Right. Okay. And then lastly, and then I'm actually going to let you go. Big Blue and Bell Creek, you said you're treating them sort of as an option there that doesn't cost you a lot. So, I mean, uh, I would like to ask you more about that, but then at the same time, that already tells you everything you need to know. Like nothing is happening this year. They're just waiting for
Well,
potentially more cash. But I suppose
yeah,
they're open for deals.
actually, you know what? I think that Bell Creek firmly fits into that camp. It's a gold play. It's within the gates of the Carlin Gold Complex. I can't even access it without signing into security, right? So it's a very, very strategic chunk of ground. It sits right beside the Ren deposit, which is 500,000 ounces, or sorry, 1.6 million ounces of gold. And we're only 500 meters away from the resource, the edge of our project. So does that make sense to be in NGM's hands? Absolutely. Have I had success convincing them that? Not yet. So we're just still working away at that, but that would be an absolutely strategic chunk of ground. Big Blue is actually kind of a sleeper of a project for us. We see incredible potential there. It's directly on trend to Peter McGaw's project, like you said. He has, their team has identified a Reina Silver, what they think is a significant CRD discovery. Well, that CRD has to have a source, and we believe that is the Big Blue, the porphyry at Big Blue. So we have that past producing high grade copper mine right there. No one ever drilled beneath that or out in the valley, just like a Butte Valley type scenario over at Selena, right? If it looks just like that. So we actually want to do IP across the project this year, across the target areas, and we want to get that project to drill ready. So if we're doing geophysics at Selena and geophysics at Big Blue, it would be to advance both projects, our priority targets at both projects, to drill ready stage. And then as hopefully the markets improve and turn, we'd raise enough money to go drill these things.
Right. Fair
Yeah.
point. Well, you're going to be back in soon, hopefully, to do a lot more of these updates. So thank you so much for sitting down with me. Let's cut it here. What am I forgetting to ask you, though? Anything that you came here hoping to talk about, but I'm failing to bring up?
Geez, man, we hit everything and a little bit extra, I think. But I mean, look, I'm a pretty open book. Anybody that, as far as like reaching out to shareholders, I mean, I'd encourage you to go to our website, ridgelineminerals.com. We trade on the TSX-V under RDG, the OTC QB under RDGMF, and my personal phone number and email is on all of our press releases. So if you want to reach out, set up a meeting, just get a hold of me and we'll go from there.
Good. Well, again, thank you, Chad. I appreciate the overview here. Very interesting story in your hands right now. So I'll most definitely keep following it, and hopefully we'll sit for an update soon. But for now, I'm off to the Athabasca Basin, the Western Athabasca Basin, specifically where I'm talking to Ross McElroy. He's the CEO of Fission Uranium, which is listed on a TSX main board under the ticker symbol FCU. No need for a fancy overview or an introduction here because Fission is a frequent guest on the barbecue. It would seem Ross here likes the heat. And it's been what, about a month or so since you and I spoke, Ross. We actually also talked before that. We talked shortly after Fission announced a new drill program was to begin at the PLS project, because over 80% of it, you told me, was never explored, and you felt like there should be more uranium along that same corridor that hosts NextGen and Denison's deposit. So you had done a financing right before that, pretty much perfectly timing the market. It would appear here, and then some drill results have come back from that drill program, as well as you've started geotechnical drilling for the development of the Triple R deposit. Um, but maybe more importantly, or something that I want to kick it off here with, is that you had a news release about an environmental permit. The really exciting stuff that everybody waits for, but completely unexpectedly, though, so that news got, I think, mostly ignored by the market. But reading further into it, it seems like this might be, a big deal, as you said, as one of your Twitter posts said. So, Ross, talk to me about that. What's going on with this permitting news? Why should anyone care about them?
Yeah, they absolutely should care, because this is a critical step in our on the development towards making the Triple R deposit an operating mine. Now, what that is basically, to summarize what we did. We submitted our environmental impact study to the province of Saskatchewan, and we did this about a month ago. So I think it was really early in March when we sent it in. So it's been about 30 days or so now since our submittal. And maybe just to kind of paint the picture a little bit, for the PLS project is required only to have provincial approval of the EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment. So just a provincial ministerial decision is all that's required on the project in order to advance it to the next stage, which is the licensing and approval of, which is done at the federal level by the CNSC. So where that's slightly different, we'll say, from other projects, other uranium projects, they require a dual approval system. So they need both the provincial and the federal approval on the EIS, whereas PLS is just a provincial approval required. So that's one of the salient differences. How the process, the information you give is very similar. It's just likely a time saver on the approval part of the EIA.
Hmm. What does that mean specifically? I mean, on this Twitter post, you say that this has the potential to considerably reduce the time and cost of the permitting process. What would the difference be specifically between this process or sort of the double process?
Yeah, and the reason being why there's a single process in place now, that was put into legislation in 2019. So a uranium project that would mine less than 2,500 tons per day, and some other triggers would not require both a provincial and a federal approval. And so depending on when you put in your application, when you filed this, and and what the various triggers are, you might require a double review. But in our case, we knew it was a single review by the province only. And in fact, that was backed up by the Canadian assessment agency that gave us a letter saying absolutely we're only required to have the provincial level. What that means is you don't have a lot of duplicity required. You only need one level of government for the EIA approval. The province, we expect it would be a shorter time frame. I mean, it's not really in our hands, how long the government takes to do the review, depending on what they submit back to us with questions, things that we have to address. But and go back. So this would be prior to receiving a final approval. But maybe, I think the timelines that we're expecting on the provincial side would be something in the order of 6 or 7 months. So I'd say, fully within calendar 2024, we would expect a ministerial decision from the province of Saskatchewan for approval of the EIA. And hopefully it'll be in Q3 of this year, so maybe a September type time frame. So that does shorten the time period just by not duplicating what you have to do and getting the federal government to also provide its review approval. So doesn't make you not receive the federal approval on the other matters down the way on the licensing and building of a uranium mine, but it does take care of the first step, because none of those happen until the EIA is completed and signed off.
But is it, so essentially what is it shortening by, like, I mean, this gives you 6 months or like something like that?
Yeah, I suppose in an ideal situation, the difference would be a 6 month versus a 1 year and change. You know,
Okay.
that it might be with a dual approval.
Right. Okay. And I'm not, certainly not in favor of overregulation or anything like that, but I suppose some
Yeah.
regulations are there for a reason. And worst of all, maybe sometimes regulators change their minds, right? So with you, I mean, essentially not having to do the double thing, could they come back and bite you in the behind later down the road and say, like, you have to do it anyways?
Well, no. First of all, we've been, you know, we have a letter of confirmation from the Canadian Assessment Agency that tells us that we don't have to go through the federal review. So we don't have to do a federal impact review. We already have that documented and confirmed by the government. But essentially, the data is the same. It's just so there's really nothing different in the environmental impact study that you submit to the province as you would submit to the province and the federal. In fact, the federal are still one of the reviewers in there. It's just that we don't require their approval on the EIA side of the equation, but they're intimately involved at both the, you know, the federal level anyways, as one of the reviewers in the process. So I don't think you're really changing the process. You're not changing the information, the level of information in there. The regulatory groups are looking at it the same way. It's just you're just not doubling up, I suppose, on the need to have two levels of government sign off, at least on the EIA part of the permitting.
Okay. Okay. So you're not sacrificing any level of due diligence or something that could come back and bite you in the
Not
behind,
at
as I
all.
said. Okay.
Not at
Just
all.
shortens the process, makes it cheaper. Okay. What else is left on the environmental permitting front for you to complete?
Well, I mean, that's it. On the environmental impact assessment, this would be the completion of the EA part of the equation. So that we are in sort of the final stages on that aspect. But as I say, yet on the overall permitting, the licensing and the ability to build a mine, well, that still takes a CNSC approval, which doesn't begin. That time clock doesn't really begin until you have the EIA signed off and finalized. So there's still, you know, a couple of years, a good 2.5 years ahead of us on the full permitting process. But towards the end of 2025, early 26, we should be in a situation where we can begin early stage construction development. You know, and receiving our final permits around that time from all levels of government. So 2026 would be the beginning of construction at PLS, and you know, that gets quite heavy in 2027 and 28. By 29, you know, we're the potential to be a producing asset, and that's always been our time charts. You know, if we had discussions you know, a few years ago, it would be exactly the same. So we've really not veered at all from our projected timelines, and when we thought certain elements of the permitting would be in place, and when we would expect to receive approvals and be able to be producing ore. So there's no change at all in our scheduling that we've been telling the market for, you know, a few years now.
Got it. But so how many permits before actually digging dirt, basically, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, well,
Or in
again,
your case, not dirt.
well, there's some early stage work that can happen before you have final approval. So You know, you could do a little bit of site preparation at some point, some level. You could get things, you know, start early on, say with the portal. For us, we're putting in a decline. I think that could likely happen in towards the end of 2025, early 26 would be when we could begin doing certain things. But the full permitting process is probably still, you know, to be received in early 2026, and then you can go full bore into construction at that point. So, as I say, for all uranium projects, it does take both the provincial and the federal approvals to be able to go full into production, and they take time. And I think that they're, you know, the questions and what they're looking for is exactly the same no matter which system you're in. It's just we're just, I think, fortunate in that, you know, in our application is using the 2019 legislative review process, and hopefully has a potential to shave you know, significant amount of time off the development schedule.
Good. Yeah, I hope that decline that you're going to be installing results in an incline in the share price. Who knows? You've also been releasing some. Well, you had other news. As I said, you had drill results. You drilled 15 shallow holes to, if my calculator was correct, an average depth of 370 meters at 6 targets. You say positive geology was hit, but no uranium mineralization yet. Why? What's happening there?
So, you know, we targeted 6 separate areas along all within the Patterson Lake corridor. Now, it's a Patterson Lake corridor that hosts Fission's Triple R deposit. It hosts NextGen's Arrow deposit, and you know, a number of showings up and down the corridor as well. So we're focusing within that band of rocks, but we tested 6 separate target areas that, you know, we used geophysics to help prioritize where we thought we would be drilling. 4 out of those 6, you know, returned highly encouraging results for us. So, you know, and 2 of them were, yeah, so-so. Not so encouraging, not necessarily requiring follow-up at this time. But 4 of those areas in particular looked quite exciting to us. So we tested both, you know, get into it a little closer. We tested on strike of the Triple R deposit to the northwest, or sorry, to the northeast. We tested to the southwest along that trend. They look quite interesting, particularly to the east of the Triple R deposit, and what we called the far east extension. That looks like we're kind of approaching areas that could have high grade mineralization. So, you know, you sort of see the same lead up to what was the precursor to the discovery of the mineralization that we know in the Triple R deposit. We're seeing similar signs, elevated radioactivity. You're looking at strong clay alteration. All the earmarks for hosting high grade mineralization we think are in that area. So, you know, that's always the first step, and that kind of allows us to vector in and hone in on finding, you know, more mineralization. The other target that I thought really was exceptional was what we call the Saloon Shear Zone. Now, it's a parallel shear zone to that which hosts the Triple R deposit, but a little further to the south. What Saloon is, if you carry the trend along there, that's the same corridor that NextGen made a discovery this winter. I think they called it the PCE, probably the Patterson Corridor East target zone. But they did hit some high-grade mineralization several kilometers up trend, and that would be the same trend as the Saloon Shear Zone. So, you know, that, and we saw some signs in there. That was probably our well, that and the Far East, I think, were the 2 most encouraging target areas. So we saw signs that really showed on our Saloon that there is a deep, large hydrothermal system, which is key for you know, preparing the rocks for hosting a uranium deposit. So we saw the alteration in there. We saw elevated radioactivity. We saw the types of clays that we're looking for, graphitic shear. So again, all the earmarks for hosting high-grade mineralization. And now we know that further along the trend, there are occurrences of high-grade mineralization. The signs that we're seeing, of course, would not be reflected of that mineralization, you know, what would it be, some 10 or so kilometers to the east. It would be more reflective of what's happening within a couple 100 meters or so of our area. So we're very encouraged and want to continue following up in the on the Saloon target. And I think that, you know, we'll be putting our plans in place, I think, for a summer exploration program again to follow up on 4 of these areas that we basically had highlighted from the winter drilling. So, you know, it's extremely encouraging. We think the whole Patterson Lake corridor is so prospective. It's a very prolific trend. It hosts 2 world-class deposits already and a number of encouraging showings. We just think that it's going to continue to develop and show new occurrences of high-grade mineralization. There's a reason that the Patterson Lake corridor is the new emerging mining district in the Athabasca Basin, and you know, I think programs like this will result in new discoveries that will only increase the you know, the value of the whole Patterson Lake corridor itself.
What's up with these names? Who named them? A cowboy? They all sound like cowboy themed.
Yeah, they are. I mean, you have to have some theme when you're naming targets. You know, rather than just have a sheer number type naming scheme. You know, I like sticking with different themes when, you know, I think the Triple R is kind of a cowboy sounding name in place too. And so, you know, we've kept the Western spaghetti Western movie theme naming convention on these target areas. I think that works for our area.
Good. That's a little perk. I actually talk to geologists sometimes, and they tell me that it's a lot more fun when you get to name the targets and refer to them in that way than it is if you don't. Let's go back to that radioactivity that you said, anomalous radioactivity. I mean, that could be thorium, doesn't necessarily have to be uranium, right?
It could be. In this case, we think our radioactivity is reflective of uranium rather than thorium. The thorium, you know, typically you would find in, say, pegmatite, sorry, it's getting a little geological, but in pegmatite veins, right? Which are sort of the, you know, they would not be the target of interest, but they tend to be radioactive, these pegmatite veins, but radioactive generally with thorium. But we're looking at a shear zone, graphitic shear zone, clay alteration. You know, it's the kind of mineralogy that you would expect to have it reflective of uranium in this setting as opposed to thorium. So
Right.
I think we're confident that, you know, and it'll get backed up when we get assay results back from our winter drilling. It'll tell you what the whole spectrum of different elements are, but I think that the radioactivity is definitely reflective of uranium as opposed to thorium in this case.
Okay. Why I'm asking this because I'm just thinking about how do you target specifically uranium and sort of stay away from thorium basically, because you mentioned geophysics and geochem as well. You've done also geochem to target here. But what are you looking for specifically on the geophysics in combination with the geochem?
So you're looking for, again, alteration cells. You're looking for big hydrothermal systems. In other words, an area, and you can map this out with geophysics if you know what it is you're looking for, but you're trying to figure out where a lot of groundwater has, over geologic time, been flushing through the system, has taken the uranium out of the original host rock, the granites, we'll say, taken uranium out of it, remobilized it, moved it into a shear zone, into a fault zone with the right kind of, you know, in fluids, and you're coming up graphitic zones. You're basically creating a redox front by coming up these graphitic fault zones with your uranium-filled water fluid. So it's a natural system, but you're looking for that big cycle of water flow through the system, and that brings in the radioactive waters that eventually become a deposit. that we can actually map out with geophysics. So we're looking for alteration, we're looking for graphite. There's just different techniques you can use in geophysics to be able to help interpret all these things. I mean, there's no outcrop that sits on surface, so we can't go looking at the rocks ahead of time and get a feel for it. It's really interpretive work based on geophysics, based on geochemistry, but these are tried and true methods of exploration for finding, high-grade uranium in the Athabasca Basin type settings. But of course, you need a great deal of experience. It's a tough type of environment to without a lot of geologic experience in what it is that you're looking for. There are some skills that are honed over time, and what how to read that interpretive type science of geophysics and hopefully lead to a discovery. And our team has been some of the most successful uranium geologists ever in the Athabasca Basin. So I'm pretty confident that we're onto the right kind of targets when we get out there and start exploring. We're not just randomly throwing drill holes down. We actually have reasons to follow up on, and with expectations that it could lead to something better. And I think that's what our winter drilling really showed, is that we do have areas that look extremely prospective. They could host high-grade mineralization. It just takes more holes to vector in on exactly the location that you want to be in. But I think that's where we're at.
Well, I suppose thank you, James and Kanan, as well, right?
Yeah, they've been with us for a long time and extremely successful uranium geoscientists. So yeah, no, these guys know what they're doing.
So, but at the alteration that you've hit here, at different spots. So you're talking about clay, chlorite, hematite, graphite, and silica that you've encountered. I know it's somewhat up for debate. Nobody really agrees on it, but having seen the core, what's your thesis telling you about the processes that have contributed to the forming of this alteration, and could you use that to follow it up in the summer drilling?
Well, I guess, if I showed you alteration and around the Triple R deposit, you'd be looking at very, very similar type environments. So the things that surround the Triple R deposit or nearby the mineralization, this is really the style of alteration and clay development that we're seeing in the right kinds of clay. Dravite, you'll hear people talk about dravite. Dravite is probably the most important clay that's involved around high-grade uranium mineralization. Well, we see dravite in our process. I've yet to see a uranium deposit that doesn't have strong dravite correlation around it. It's almost always the case. And it's just one of those signs that's earmarked for as a pathfinder element for finding mineralization. So I guess, really, like I say, when we look at the style of rocks, the type of rocks, the strength of the alteration, the hematite, the chlorite alteration, all these elements that you listed, and radioactivity, they all look very similar to what we see around the Triple R deposit, and what we know about the Arrow deposit has similar type mineralization too. So we know we're in the right environment, and it's just a matter of continuing to step out from areas that and eventually find the sweet spot on these structures that lead to discovery. I suppose a discovery to me is sort of the last phase in on the pathway to discovery. You have to start off with doing geophysics, looking at encouraging geophysics, getting geochemistry, seeing all these signs of clay alteration. Those are the steps that are required and ultimately lead to mineralization. So we think we're kind of pretty well developed along that pathway to making a new discovery in the PLS project.
You mentioned clay alteration. I thought maybe silica alteration it would be more interesting here. Is there a correlation between silica alteration intensity and the uranium grades observed that in this round of drilling?
Locally, yes, because you're always looking for a contrast between the soft rock and the hard rock. The silica is going to give you the hard rock. The clay alteration is going to give you the soft rock, and quite often it's that that interface between the two where things happen. But your primary thing is you're looking for a lot of the silica degradation, I suppose, in the so that where the country rock itself has sort of fallen apart because it's been rotted out by the water flowing through the system that's produced the clays, brought in uranium fluids. That's an important prepping of the zone itself. And then where will uranium precipitate out? So in other words, you've got uranium rich fluids maybe moving through the system. Now you need to have a trap, and that's quite often where the silica buttress might be. You start creating voids between the soft rock and the hard rock. You need a geochemistry redox front in order to precipitate out the uranium out of the fluids. I mean, it gets a little technical, but that's really what you're ultimately trying to do. You have uranium rich fluids, and now you're trying to present an area, a trap, where the fluids kind of hit and precipitate out. That's what forms mineralization. That's what forms a deposit. So,
right. Yeah, basically, it sort of acts as a barrier as far as I understand it. That's where I'm asking about the silica. And I'm also asking because there seems to be variability between the different styles of mineralogy within the alteration that you've encountered in the different holes. And again, it goes back to what I was asking about previously, or better trying to understand where the radioactivity picks up so that I can better understand how and based on what you'll be prioritizing drill targets during that summer drill program.
Yeah, and again, like to me, the radioactivity is kind of one of the things. I mean, that's obvious. The radioactivity is coming off of uranium or thorium, as you rightly noticed. But if it's coming off of uranium, that's actually one of the closest signs to being close to uranium is having radioactivity, and we do have that kind of increase in radioactivity that's associated with that alteration, with the clay. It's all kind of happening at the same time. So when you start getting 4 or 5 of these features coalescing at the same area, you're getting the complexity of all these different things. That's what creates deposits. That's what creates high grade mineralization. We're seeing all those right kind of signs there, and so yeah, it encourages us enough to want to get back in there, do some follow-up work, and so we'll be working towards a summer exploration program, as I say, following up a number of these key areas. So I'd look for further activity on our PLS project probably later in the summer, but work on some timing issues ahead of it. But I am very, very encouraged by the winter drilling and want to get back out there and continue to follow up on those things that lead to a new discovery.
Okay. When you say late summer, what's that, sort of August?
Well, we have some drilling already into the slot on resource drilling on the R1515 West Zone. We're anticipating that beginning in May of this year. So, that's basically, there's a different focus with that program. That's taking our mineralized zone that we already know of and doing some infill drilling on it in order to convert the classification of the resource from inferred to indicated and measured. So that program is slated to begin in May. But what we might do, we might sort of work together on both the R1515 and some regional exploration targeting throughout the in the same time. So we'll have 2 drills up on the project area. And then we'll look towards, doing both the 1515 and following up on these zones. So between May and September this year, I think there's going to be a great deal of activity, both at the resource side and exploration. But we're still working on the timelines as we speak.
How was this program in terms of budget? How much did you end up paying per meter when you look at everything?
Yeah, so I think our budget came in at around $3.5 million for what we did this winter. So with roughly 55 to, well, almost 6,000 meters of drilling, 3.5, you get a sense for, what the cost is overall, somewhere around
600
500,
bucks.
rough
Okay.
math is $500 a meter-ish.
Is it
Yeah,
going to be cheaper in the summer because it's summer?
no, quite often summer costs can get more. It won't be in our case, but summer costs typically increase as opposed to winter because now for most exploration programs, you're incorporating a helicopter in for transportation, for moving the drill around. Helicopters are several $1,000s an hour as opposed to a tractor pulling things around at $100 or $200 an hour. So it does quite often get more expensive in the summer. Our targets are all fairly close. They're all road accessible, so we can use ground transport for the most part to get the drill to locations. There will be some cases where we will use helicopter for moving things around, but overall, I expect our costs in the summer to be very, very similar to what the winter costs were. And we've got an experienced crew out there so that you're not putting a lot of extra money into the learning curve of, on the project that often happens. So we've got drillers that we've used, that have been working on the project for years and years, and in the same technical team in there. So I think, we can hit the ground running with the experienced crews that we have, and it's much more efficient use of capital, that's for sure. If we can put all the money into actual meters as opposed to learning curves and failed drill holes and the sort of thing that often plagues a number of projects. But I think we're in good shape.
But hey, 200 bucks an hour to drive a tractor, you're making me rethink my whole strategy here online. I wouldn't survive driving a tractor anyways. But okay, but you don't know how many meters you're drilling and exactly where those meters are going to be deployed
I'll
yet.
give you an idea, Antonio. I think it's going to be roughly 6,000 meters, 6,500 meters of regional exploration targeting. That's kind of what we're anticipating.
Okay, so 4 million bucks budget-ish.
Yep. I
Okay.
think that's a fair number to use for the
Got
time
the
being.
money to do that, I assume, since the bot deal.
Yes, we do. Our treasury is doing really well. We've got something, I think, a little north of $140 million in the treasury. That's well financed. Now that's enough capital to actually get through the entire development phase of works over the next couple of years on the engineering side and permitting and all the costs associated with that, including early stage development costs, CapEx. But that's certainly adequate to also fund a drill program right now as we're contemplating for the regional side as well. So
Okay.
yeah, no, our capital needs are quite good. The company's treasury is very healthy, so no need to go back to the markets at this point.
Okay. And then this geotechnical drilling that you've started right now, completely separate from what we just talked about. It's got a completely other end goal, if you will. What's that all about?
Yeah, so that's all part of, I guess, the final phase of the front end engineering design work, which transitions into detailed engineering. Detailed engineering is basically the engineering that we'll do to build the mine. I mean, it's sort of the final workup, and so this is sort of in advance of the detailed engineering. We move from the engineering side. We'll be transitioning from the front end engineering to detailed engineering towards June of this year. This is sort of an advance of the detailed engineering work. It's basically supporting information for our landfills, for the tailing management area, for the vent shafts that we'll be putting in the project as well. So just to help with final design work on those elements. So a number, it's going to take us maybe, I guess, all in all, about a month to complete the geotechnical drilling. So that'll we'll be underway, next week. The drills will be up there doing that geotechnical work. supervised by well, a combination of our geologic team, but also the third-party specialists in geotechnical engineering, because it's really all meant for supporting project development rather than anything to do with exploration and finding more mineralization. It's really all about getting things ready for the various infrastructure parts of the equation.
Yeah, so tailings facility, waste management, ventilation, that's what you listed, sort of a bit better helping you understand how all that is going to work once you get to a mining scenario.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Good. Well, the next news release that you're gonna have coming out, what's that gonna be? Is it gonna be related to the winter drilling or to this geotechnical drilling?
No, I think the next news I anticipate, there will be, obviously, we're going to highlight out some of the results, the geochemical work that we saw from the winter program. But geochem returns don't happen, and they take about 2 to 3 months to get all the results back from the lab. So that probably we won't have that information out until I would guess sometime in May or June for the assay. But prior to that, we'll be letting the market know what our next drill plans are with respect to the drilling on the R1515 West Zone and some regional exploration that we want to get out as well. So
Good.
that'll be sort of the next follow-up news, I would think.
Any marketing or anything else planned in the meanwhile? Conferences, something else?
Yeah, no, there's always marketing on the go. We're just next week, I'll be in Toronto attending a conference I guess it's next Wednesday. I believe it's Thursday. We'll be doing the TSX. We've been invited to close the TSX market for the day. It's Fission's 10th anniversary on the TSX. So yeah, the company's invited to close a market on that day. I believe it's either Wednesday or Thursday. I can check on that, but that's next week. And then we'll do a little bit of marketing in London as well, and in the Middle East in Dubai. So we've got
wow.
a little bit of travel ahead of us. But meeting new and existing shareholders. New hope to be shareholders, but existing loyal shareholders as well in all these different locations. So,
are you trying to be the Robert Friedland of the uranium market?
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's a lot of activity planned on the the near term. The uranium market's really quite strong these days. There's a lot of interested ears out there and people that we want to see, and people that are quite excited about what's happening at Fission. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, are you trying to be the Robert Friedland of the uranium market, going and marketing in the Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's new area for us. We haven't really put a whole lot of attention into that part of the area. It's actually the UAE where we'll be, so in Dubai. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge investor appetite over in that part of the world. They understand energy. There's some pretty large sovereign funds out there. It's just part of a strategy that an area that we've not put a whole lot of focus on up until now. But we want to get a sense of what the market's like over in that part of the world, and see if we can get people interested in the Fission story over there.
Good. Well, thank you, Ross. I appreciate the overview. It seems like you're one of the few companies who are doing real development work, and I also appreciate that. And again, I appreciate you talking to me. Not all, well, you're actually one of the few development companies who actually want to talk about me for a full podcast. So thank you for doing this. And we'll speak soon. In the meantime, though, I'm gonna move over to the Golden Triangle of BC, where I'll be talking to Lawrence Rolston. He's the CEO of MTB Metals, a company with 6 projects, making up what is one of the largest land positions in the Golden Triangle. Companies listed on the TSX Ventures Exchange and a ticker symbol MTB, where an average of about 200,000 shares trade each day. with a 52-week high of 23.5 cents and a 52-week low of 3 cents. With a market cap of just about $4.5 million and about 116 million shares outstanding. Today, this is a 4-cent stock. With options and warrants on top of that, that results in about 160 million fully diluted shares, with management and insiders estimated to own about 30% of the company. And Ross Beatty, by the way, is also an investor in this company, something we're going to talk about later on in the conversation. As of the last interim financial statement, which is dated November 30, the company had about $600,000 in current assets, about 1/3 of which was in actual cash. Cash equivalents, $120,000 was in marketable securities in the form of Ascot Resources shares. They owned 250,000 shares. At the time, that would now, by the way, be worth about $200,000. As well as, of course, some receivables and some account payables on top of that as well. On the current liability side of the balance sheet, at the time, there were account payables worth about $326,000, and $31,000 was due to a JV partner at the time. That same financial statement tells me that MTB spent on average about $70,000 per month on operational expenses during the fiscal 2023, while about $400,000 was spent on exploration and evaluation, with drilling being about a sixth of that, leaving the G&A to drilling ratio at around 1-to-1, and the overall G&A represented around 15% of all the money that was spent during last fiscal year. Please do head over to the company's website as well as setterplus.ca as always, though, because you want to look at the most up-to-date financials and numbers by the time you're watching this. Obviously, this is a non-revenue generating company. They rely on the public markets for financings. And that means that these numbers might be different by the time you're watching this, especially considering that MTB sold a project for $1 million since this financial statement was published. And they also closed on a small flow-through financing before the end of last calendar year. By the way, calendar and fiscal year, not the same thing in this case. So again, you want to look for yourself. Boring stuff aside, though, 6 projects to talk about here. So no lack of topics. Copper, gold mainly. So very heavily focused on porphyries here. But then there's also a silver element to all of this, with the 6 projects combined, covering about 604 square kilometers of land in the Golden Triangle. I'll just take it up sort of randomly, or maybe not exactly randomly, but the first asset is called the American Creek. That's the smallest project in the portfolio. It's about 2,600 hectares, and it's located about 22 kilometers from a town that listeners would be familiar with, as we visited a lot. That'd be Stewart, BC. So this is just north from the past producing Red Cliff gold copper mine, which is exactly where the Mountain Boy silver mine is, which is also where this company gets its name, by the way. This used to be the flagship asset not too long ago. So not as cool as mountain bike metals, but still okay. I'm not doing a full project overview here per project because, again, otherwise we'll have to listen to my voice for another 20 minutes and nobody wants that. But this is a silver target, specifically an intermediate epithermal target, though, that's hoped to contain silver and base metals, basically, which are thought to have been deposited there by an early Jurassic laterite porphyry intrusion, which is exactly the type of mineralization found at some of the past producing mines in the area as well. And then moving closer to BC, but still about 18 kilometers away from it to the northeast, is where the BA project is. This project has been explored extensively since the early 1900s, and 182 holes have been drilled here, showing comparable silver, lead, and zinc mineralization. Third property would be called Surprise Creek, and this one is further away from Stewart, still in Golden Triangle, though, and it's assumed that mineralization here is hosted in the same layers as the BA property, with work on this project dating back to the 80s, but this is the project that I was talking about earlier. This one was sold for $1 million to Ross Beatty last year. So I guess the actual third project here would be Southmore. That's also a project that's historically being worked on by many different parties until MTB sort of consolidated it into one land package. There are good drill targets on this because there's been geophysics completed, but it's not yet been drilled by the company as far as I understand it. Thea is another project, one of their projects, located 30 kilometers east to the southeast, actually, of Stewart. This property also has historically been drilled, showing potential to host precious metals in veins that are potentially fed by a porphyry or a VHMS, with grab samples suggesting that more exploration here is warranted in the future as well. Another property would be Red Cliff. The Red Cliff property is only owned for 35%. There's 35% interest that MTB Metals has in this property. It's a JV. And so this is also where that current liability on the balance sheet came from. MTB owns that to Decade Resources, who owns the other 65%. So this is basically for financing their part of the exploration costs on the JV. This project has also been looked at extensively since the early 1900s with two main zones of interest, one of them hosting copper gold mineralization, the other one being mainly a potential gold system. And last but not least, the property that MTB was most active on most recently, that'd be Telegraph. That's a 100% owned property as it stands today. But there is an option to acquire a 60% interest in a 7,500 hectare package, which is where the recent drilling was being done on. The area of interest here is the Dock Trend, and it's of interest because of the presence of a hydrothermal system supposedly driven by a porphyry. And that was confirmed this year by the drilling. Actually, early on this year, there was a news release confirming that, showing similar fingerprint to some of the ore deposits in the area, specifically encountering favorable mineralization, favorable mineralogy, in the alteration in the face of potassium feldspar and secondary biotite in several phases of monzonite dikes. Suffice it to say that there is enough to be talked about here today. But before any of that, Lawrence, maybe worth talking about just generally the structure and the strategy moving forward, because you're a sub $5 million market cap company with 6 projects. How do you manage all of them at the same time? How do you move this thing forward?
Well, yes, very good point and very good introduction. We can talk about a couple of those points in more detail in
Sure.
due course here. But yeah, the overall strategy, yes, we have a tiger by the tail. You know, the Telegraph project, a very, very significant porphyry copper gold discovery. We drilled 4 holes on it. We got results that are in line with operating mines in BC. But, you know, people in the industry, geologists that look at it, say the great results, getting, you know, the kind of results that we got on the very first holes into a big system like this was a big achievement. But investors were looking for fantastic results, and we only delivered great results. So the shares were sold off on the basis of the results from drilling on Telegraph. Now, having said that, they were good results, and we've got a lot of evidence that those 4 holes, they spanned 3.3 kilometers of a mineralized porphyry. They all hit intense porphyry mineralization. And we got some really good copper gold numbers out of the holes, but not enough to get investors excited. Now, the important point here is that those holes just clip the edges of the hearts of what we believe to be multiple porphyry systems within that 3.3 kilometer trend. It's an alkalic porphyry. It's very similar geologically to the Galore deposit just south of us, and in roughly the same footprint to the area that we drilled at Telegraph. The Galore deposit hosts 1.2 billion tons of good grade copper gold porphyry mineralization. And that project has, at the pre-feasibility stage, it's jointly owned by Teck and Newmont. And the important point, though, is that 1.2 billion tons is hosted in 13 separate alkalic porphyry centers, or basically the alkalic deposits tend to be like a series of pencil-like intrusions. And that's what we're seeing with the drilling that we did on the Dock Trend.
Let's
so we've drilled. Yeah,
I do want to talk about that more in depth when we move forward, and I also want to talk about some of the geology that you've been encountered there. But the point here was sort of like 600 square kilometers, a lot of ground to explore on your own dime. And during PDAC, you told me that a lot of the big companies there were getting interested in what you have there. So what I was referring to when I said, how do you move this thing forward, is sort of like, are you moving forward on any of those fronts? Can you get a JV partner? Can you get some money from somewhere more strategically than having to do a capital raise yourself?
Yes. And sorry, I got distracted. On the 5 secondary projects, they're all available for joint ventures. We're looking for other people's money to advance those projects. And over the past year, we've had a fair amount of interest from various juniors in doing something on those projects. But the markets have been brutal. And I've made it a condition that anybody that takes control of one or more of those projects, they have to do something meaningful in the first year. And that's been the challenge. They're all saying, yeah, we'd love to take this on and we'll do our best to raise money. But I'm saying, show us some money, give us a firm commitment to do some work on the projects, and we'll talk. So with the gold, silver, and now the copper price also really notching upward, we're starting to see a lot more interest in these projects, and I'm pretty confident we're going to get something done. There's a lot of interest from juniors and the majors in getting involved in the Golden Triangle. And the only way they can do it is through a company like MTB, because every square meter of worthwhile geology in the Golden Triangle is held by somebody. So anybody that wants to get into the region, they have to do it through somebody that currently holds property like MTB Metals. So I'm confident now that we're seeing an upturn in the market, we're going to be able to conclude joint ventures that will advance those projects, will benefit the shareholders of MTB without us having to put more cash into them. On the Telegraph project, which is a big one and the most expensive, and for a junior to be exploring an early stage porphyry is a huge undertaking. Now, we've demonstrated the presence of a very significant porphyry system, and we have a lot of other potential on the project. We're in discussion with the majors. In fact, I didn't know until over the last few months here, but we've been in touch with 15 major mining companies on this project, all of whom have expressed some level of interest in working with us. Clearly, for most of the majors, it's earlier stage than they would like to get involved in. But there is interest, and we're talking about ways to structure a deal that gives them exposure to the project, funds some work for us, and but doesn't cap the upside potential for the MTB shareholders. So I'm optimistic that something will come together. At the same time, we're in discussion with various groups within the industry that, there's a number of groups where they have multiple companies within their stable, if you will, and they've got, pools of capital that they've got access to, and they've got pools of talent. So it would be great to align with one of those kind of groups.
Yeah. Do you think getting in a second Ross Beatty or something like that, is that an avenue that you could pursue in as getting sort of a strategic money guy, basically?
Well, that's what we're working toward. And there are, other, let's call them high net worths, industry players, people that have achieved great things in the industry already that are looking for other things to do. So there's a high level of recognition that what we have discovered at Telegraph is very significant. And we're beginning to get the recognition for the merits of that project.
Wait, let's talk about Telegraph and specifically more from a geologic perspective, maybe specifically about the alteration system that's at play here. Important most of the times, maybe even more so important where you're at in the world, because the secondary biotite and potassium feldspar alteration that I mentioned at the beginning in the monazite dikes is interesting. But how does that compare to the alteration systems that you see at some of the neighboring deposits that are in the Golden Triangle?
The alteration and the sort of overall pattern of mineralization that we're seeing is most like the Galore deposit, which is a series of separate deposits. Now, a really important distinction between the alkalic style of porphyry and the classic or calc-alkalic style of porphyry is that the alkalic deposits tend to occur as clusters of smaller bodies. And the best example of an alkalic system is Cadia, It's Newcrest primary mine, and of course that was the main reason for Newmont's interest in Newcrest was to get their hands on the Cadia deposit. Now, the Cadia as an alkalic deposit led Newcrest into the Golden Triangle. So their first involvement was with taking an interest in the Red Chris mine, and then they took over Brucejack. So those are both operating mines in the Golden Triangle. Red Chris in particular is an alkalic, and Newcrest did a presentation. I think we've stolen a slide out of their presentation, which is in our presentation on the website, where they compare the geology of Red Chris to Cadia. And that analogy is very apt for what we're seeing. And it's early stage yet, but what we're seeing at Telegraph along the dock trend is very much like the Newcrest or the Galore style of alkalic mineralization. Now, the big thing there, you talk about the alteration halos. In a calc-alkalic system, the halos can extend for hundreds of meters. And in the alkalic system, each of these centers is typically a few hundred meters across, 300, 400, 500 meters across. And the alteration halos typically tend to be more telescoped and often are measured in tens of meters. So if you're drilling into a calc-alkalic system and you get a certain style of mineralization, you can vector within hundreds of meters. In these systems, it's a lot tighter, and you can be tens of meters away and really not know that you're that close to the system. So
Well,
one of
wouldn't the width and the mineralogy of those monzonite dikes change the closer you get to the heart of the system?
well, yes, and look, I'm not the right person to be talking about the details of the geology. Lucia Tenney is the VP exploration. My background is geology, but I'm not really tuned into the details of this. But what we're seeing with the dikes, it appears that we're on the periphery of the system, where the mineralization is sort of branching off into faults and fractures and cracks around the periphery of the system. So the good news there is it looks like we're high in the system, and the implication there is that we've preserved most of the system.
What about the structural controls in that case? When you're high up in the system, how are they materializing in this round of drilling?
We need to do more work on details of the structure. And certainly there's a structural component to that, and the dikes are clearly feeding into structures, and the structures might be coeval with the emplacement. But at this stage, we need to do more work on it. But the short version of the story is that we have what appears to be an alkalic system. We've drilled into what appears to be three separate alkalic intrusives, if you will, and where the holes intercepted them appears to be peripheral to the heart of the actual what we believe to be the core of the mineralized system.
How do you then deal with that based on knowing how the fingerprint of a system compares to the others and what you think you have right now with this thesis? How do you target the next drill holes? Where do they go, and basically how do you find higher grade here?
Well, the first target is pretty clear cut. Holes 1 and hole 3, 300 meters apart. No, sorry, 700 meters apart. Appear to be on either side of one of these intrusive centers. And it maybe sounds different than most people would have done. But when we went into the drill program early in the season, we had IP that we had done the previous year for part of it, and we had some IP that was done in 2012. And we used our recent and the historic as a starting point to identify the drill hole locations. As we were drilling the first hole, we recognized that there's a strong correlation between the chargeability and the best chalcopyrite. So again, in a calc-alkalic system, the pyrite tends to get pushed further out from the heart of the system, and you get a high chargeability halo around the area of best mineralization. The alkalic systems are they're more telescoped, and there's an overlap between the pyrite zone and the chalcopyrite zone, and therefore, until we drilled and we saw the core and we saw what it looked like, under the surface, we didn't know exactly what to expect. But once we saw the overlap of the chalcopyrite and the pyrite, and the fact that that mineralized zone where we're seeing the chalcopyrite is highly chargeable, we extended the IP survey to close a gap. We overlaid part of the 2012 survey, which wasn't very high resolution. And late in the season, we did a fairly significant IP survey. Now, having the results of that IP survey and integrating it with the earlier survey gave us a pretty good IP model, a chargeability model of the system. And from that, we can see that hole 1 and hole 3 clip the edges of the chargeability high. And our premise, based on what we're seeing in the drill core and all the other information that we have, is that the area between hole 1 and hole 3 is the heart of that particular system. So we've got a very clear-cut target between those two drill holes, which the IP is showing us we're basically on opposite edges of one intrusion.
The heart of that IP anomaly that you've provided on one of the 3D schematics that you've provided with that news release, how deep do you think you're going to have to drill to hit sort of the heart of that IP anomaly?
Well, we're seeing it at a similar depth to the holes that we drilled, which were on average about 500 meters.
But it looks way deeper on this 3D schematic that I have here. Like the very
it extends
pink.
Deeper. No, there's no question that it does extend much deeper. It extends to the limit of the detection of the IP system. Now, we also did magnetotellurics at the same time as we did the IP, and it gives us a look deeper than the IP. And we are seeing MT anomalies at depth as well, which suggests that the system could go quite deep. And it's really important to recognize that these systems, while they're not laterally extensive, they do go to great depths. So Red Cliff, some of the best mineralization is a kilometer deep. Now, they're mining it from surface, but the plan is to get down deeper into the system and use block caving to mine the deeper part. But it goes basically from surface to over a kilometer. And again, it's early stage, but as you pointed out, the IP chargeability does extend deeper than the drill holes have gone to date, and the MT is giving us some indication that the system does extend a great deal deeper than what we've drilled to date.
Is the higher chargeability, so the deep pinks, if you will, here, is that where you expect grades to be picking up as well?
Well, we expect it lateral to the existing holes, and for it to continue to depth.
Okay, so next year, basically, well, this year, next drill season, I wanted to say, is grade the question that you'll be answering with those drill targets in this case?
Well, we will be pretty straightforward to show, right or wrong on this supposition that the area between 1 and 3 is the heart of the mineralized system.
Okay. What kind of grades do you expect to get in the heart of that mineralized system?
Well, there's every reason to expect the same kind of grades as Galore or Red Chris, which are two similar styles of deposits in the same region. And those grades are higher than typical in a certainly than a calc-alkalic system.
Right.
And in particular, the alkalic systems are attractive because of the high gold content. And that's why Newcrest is focused on Cadia and then went to the Golden Triangle. There's only a few areas on the planet that have the alkalic porphyry style of mineralization that we're seeing in the Cadia district and the Golden Triangle. There's another area in Greece, and there's an area in the Philippines. There was a paper by Alan Wilson, who's a renowned expert on the Cadia system and alkalic in general, and he pointed out these 4 clusters of alkalic systems.
Would you expect grade variability to be an issue though, the deeper you go here, or would the grades just sort of pick up gradually and stay continuous?
Well, I think like any of these systems, there's going to be a fair amount of variability in the grade. There's going to be holes that hit and the holes that don't. And we're seeing multiple phases of intrusion. And we're doing a lot of work right now on age dating and trying to correlate the various phases of intrusion with the fertility. So it's a good thing that there's been multiple phases of intrusion. It means that the system is really juiced. But it looks at this moment, it looks like some of the later phases are less well mineralized. So to the extent that there's been a dike or an intrusion within the earlier intrusion, that might be lower grade. So it will definitely take a fair amount of drilling to really understand the geometry of the system.
Well, then you go back to the money question again, I suppose, to the beginning where you say, it'd take a fair amount of drilling. It's deep drilling. It's not cheap drilling, as far as I understand. It's also, by the way, it's also on a hill. That's what I see on the schematics, sort of on a mountain, as many things are in that region. What's the cost of drilling there per meter?
Well, the actual cost of drilling is not that much, but you throw in the helicopter support and the camp costs and all the rest of it. Golden Triangle is expensive. And our biggest line item on the expenses is the helicopter. So there's no question that, look, the all-in cost last year, I think, was over $700 a meter. That it's hard to know exactly because the helicopter is flying around. It was moving the geophysical crew around. It was moving geologists out to various parts. And it's really hard to break it out exactly. But it's definitely expensive. Now, where we are, it's a hill, it's not a mountain. And in the presentation, there's some panorama shots along the ridge top, and it's pretty good access. Now, we still need to build drill pads and drill off the pads because it is reasonably steep. But the good news is when it comes to mining, this is not like some of these systems where I've seen where you've got a porphyry that's centered in the bottom of a valley, and you get into very high strip ratios as you start to go down. In this situation, basically that whole ridge top is going to be taken off. So the access to it, the strip ratio, all the other variables connected with mining are going to be favorable for this project. Now, clearly, it's a long ways from here to even thinking about mining, but it is something I like to do is just look at it at a high level and say, okay, is there a fatal flaw? And in this case, I'm seeing a lot of positives in thinking ahead to mining.
Well, you mentioned block caving for some of the other deposits of this type, but block caving wouldn't that typically require sort of ore body to be beneath relatively flat or maybe sort of gently sloping ground to be able to make sure that the controlled collapse of the ore body and the extraction of it doesn't doesn't possess challenges, basically. What I'm trying to ask you, like, is block cave going to work in this case?
Well, there's no reason in the world it won't work. And now bear in mind that, Red Chris, for example, they've mined for years from the open pit, and they're still mining from the open pit, and they will mine from the open pit for a long time. The block caving is where the deposit extends to depth. And if you think of the open pit as being a cone, as you go deeper, that cone is bringing in a exponentially larger amount of waste material that has to be moved. So you get to a point where the open pit doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And so you go in and basically you start at low down in the deposit and you block cave it upward.
Yeah. Okay. So you basically mine the hill out and then do a block cave, because what I'm asking is wouldn't the weight of the hill basically be too much for the cave itself? Where yeah.
Well, by the time whoever it is that owns this thing way out in the future, whenever they get to the point of block caving, the hill will be gone because that's the ore body.
Okay.
This is a very fortunate situation in that the ore body is contained within a hill that's sticking out of two valleys.
Okay. So it's sort of an open pit into a block cave type of scenario. Okay.
Which is typical, yes.
Yeah. How'd the program go, by the way, in terms of efficiency? I mean, those sedimentary volcanics, Tuhini host rocks, I believe is what this hosted in. With the volcanic rocks, they're sort of adding a layer of complexity here for you. So how efficient was this drill program in terms of meters drilled per shift and lost meters and so on and so forth?
The drilling was very, very well done. We used one of a drill company called Helm, which is owned by the Tahltan First Nation. And they've done a lot of drilling in this area. They're very good at it. And we had no problems in terms of lost holes or stuck or drill rods getting stuck. They did a masterful job of executing the drill program. Really good core recoveries all the way through. Even when they got into the material that has a high sulfide content and is very friable, they were still getting really good recoveries.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I think it's a bit so good because it's very layered. That's where I'm coming from with this. But I mean, fair enough. It's the majority of your exploration costs, as you mentioned, went to a helicopter expense that costed you almost $2 million last year. Not a low number. I mean, could you do without it, given the proximity to Stewart?
Well, we're along the Telegraph project is a long ways from Stewart. There's a road about 10 kilometers to the north of the project, and our camp is along that road. So we have road access into the camp. All of our bulk materials, everything else we bring in to the camp on trucks on the road. And then we have a helicopter. Now, the challenge is it's on the north side of the Stikine River and the project is on the south side. The Stikine is a pretty big river, but it's a reasonably short hop by helicopter into the property, but anything on the property would require a helicopter.
Okay.
And that's the case for anything in this region that at this stage of the project, it's all helicopter support.
You don't own a helicopter company, do you?
No, but
Wish you did.
Our business partners on this project, the Tahltan, they own a drilling company. They've got a relationship with a helicopter company, a joint venture, basically. And in fact, 63% of our exploration budget went to the Tahltan. Now, just back up to in your introduction. I think you mentioned a number of 400,000 for the exploration budget. It
Yeah.
was much, much higher than that. I'm not sure where that number came from, but it was a multi-million-dollar budget.
That's $400,000
And
a month. I sort of break it
oh,
down
oh,
into
per
a
month.
G&A
Oh,
just to sort of see per month how much are you spending on average on G&A and how much are you spending on exploration. But I believe your total exploration program, helicopter and everything included, was in the $4.5 million range, something along those lines.
yes, yes, which makes a very different ratio when you take the exploration budget in total compared to the G&A.
Yeah,
And
so what I
even in
do
the
is compare G&A to drilling specifically. So drilling,
oh,
not
I
so
see.
really only the drills turning. And in your case, that came up to, so your G&A is relatively low. It's definitely not high. And that was 70 grand a month was the average, and then 70 grand a month was the average of drilling, so not the exploration campaign. And drilling total for the year again came to about 800,000, where the helicopter cost was 2 million. And then there's a bunch of other things like assays and personnel, the geology consulting, and so on and so forth. So that's where those
Yeah,
numbers came from.
and not to dwell too long on really a trivial item, but a large part even of the admin is actually geological work.
Hmm.
Like I spend more than half my time doing actual geological type work as opposed to pure, corporate type things. And and another really important aspect here is that our VP exploration, Lucia Tenney, she and her husband have a company that supplies the geologists to the project.
Hmm.
And it looks like she's being paid a lot of money, but the reality is that most of that money is going out to independent geologists that
Okay.
she's contracting. And that's a
Okay, because
huge
that's what I was
benefit.
gonna ask. Yeah, that was one of the costs that I had on my list to ask about. So yeah, thank you for clarifying.
So the actual payments for the administrative function are as low as they get in the industry.
Hmm.
And so all of Lucia's time and a large part of what we pay to her is actually going out to the independent geologists. And a big chunk of my time is geology.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, fair point. You definitely make a fair point there. There's an option on this project, specifically where you drill. I mean, you hold an option.
Yes.
When do you know whether you want to exercise that option or not?
We've completed the earn-in requirements. We've got a cash payment that we need to make, and we'll do that. We're a year or two ahead on our obligations on the project, so we've got lots of time to make the cash payment. After which, the joint venture partner will be contributing 40% on that part of the property. Now, the option is on the northern part of the dock trend. And you're absolutely right. The drilling was entirely on the option property. Now, the dock trend extends further south, and that's all on it. It's a separate option, but on that one, we are earning into 100%. And again, we've completed the spending requirements. We have a cash payment, and then that'll be concluded. All the rest of the property will be 100% owned.
Yeah. Yeah. That's but you have time to make that option payment. How much money is that again?
It's about $50,000, I think, is the final payment.
Okay. When do you want to go back this year for drilling? I suppose finance depending, but when would you think that's going to be?
Well, we'll be able to get on the property by about mid-June. So early in June, we can start setting up the camp, getting everything ready, and do the first field work by about mid-June. The property is fairly low elevation compared to a lot of other properties in the triangle. We're in a rain shadow or a snow shadow. We don't get a big snowpack, and the valley below the dock ridge is about 500 meters elevation. The top of the ridge is about 1,100 meters. So a lot of these projects in the triangle are significantly higher and get a lot more snow. So we're able to get on earlier, and we can work through the end of October. Now, financing obviously is the key, and time is ticking by here. We're hopeful we're going to get some kind of a deal in place to do work. We've budgeted basically 3 levels of program. Now, we don't need to do anything on any of our properties this year. They're all in good standing for years into the future. So if we had to shut down completely, we're not going to lose any of the properties. But we don't want to do that. We've got a short season. We want to take advantage of it. So our low-level budget is to get a bunch of geologists out in the field and explore the other parts of the property. So even among the majors that we're talking to, they look at the Strata and Yeti and Plum and all the other targets, and they say, well, how do you know that Dock is the best target? And the short answer is we don't know, but that's where the historic work was done. It gave us the best starting point. The other parts of the property are equally prospective, perhaps even more prospective. And no matter whether or not we drill, we need to do a lot more basically regional exploration work on the balance of the property to get us to a point where we have a better regional understanding of the whole system. Now, part of that will involve further airborne geophysics. And we've got really good mag coverage. We're looking at doing some kind of EM type coverage on the property. And IP is very effective. We would like to do a lot more IP. We'd like to push the Dock trend further to the south, and the first step there would be using IP. So there's a lot of work to be done. And as I say, a multi-layered budget approach depending on the amount of financing that we can lock down in the near term here.
Right. You mentioned EM before IP, but yeah, well, I assume you'd start with IP because the IP is basically being the bread and butter here for targeting, right?
Well, IP is a more the precision thing. The EM gives a better overview of the property. Like it'll help to identify structures, and it'll give us better definition of where the intrusive units are. And once we get that kind of overview a little more clearly outlined, then we would identify specific targets and go in and do the ground-based IP. IP is pretty expensive because you're doing it on the ground, and in this case, it would have to be helicopter supported.
Right. Yeah. And First Nations, everybody, because you mentioned doing it underground, you're working, you said most of your budget or a big part of your budget for exploration went to the First Nation, but everybody else is happy with you doing groundwork and doing all that work that you're talking about here?
We have a multi-year, multi-site drill permit that basically allows us to drill pretty much anywhere on the property.
Okay.
We've done the archaeological overview. We've got clearance on that, and so we're good to go. We can do basically anything from groundwork through drilling.
That financing thing sort of keeps hanging above your head, if you will, and I'm thinking about how actively are you marketing the projects that you have up right now that are, because you have 6 of them. So basically the main idea that pops up, the main question that pops up in my head is like, why not sell all 5 of them, even if it's just for $1 million each, and then you have $5 million, which is your market cap, but then you do a relatively big drill program for that. And how actively are you pursuing sort of that opportunity? How do you even market these projects?
A huge amount of the marketing is networking, personal networking, and we've reached out to a large number of companies. We've got a fairly significant level of interest. Look, if we could sell each of those projects for $1 million cash up front, I'd probably do it. It's hard to achieve that. The Surprise Creek thing was a special case. Other projects are harder to sell. Look, there's a lot of interest in a junior coming in and spending money on the property. And a typical deal would be they spend a bunch of money, they earn 60 or 80% interest, we get a bunch of shares, we get a little bit of cash. And that kind of deal I think we could achieve. And we would have achieved it on probably two of the projects over the last few months, except that I insisted that there be a minimum first-year work commitment. That we don't want to have the things tied up and not have work done.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
with the higher metal prices and I'm seeing signs of a lot more optimism coming into the industry. People are now looking for projects, they're looking for things to do. I'm pretty confident we're going to get something on that. Now, that's going to advance those projects. It's going to create news flow. It's not going to provide hard cash that we can use for drilling telegraph. Telegraph is going to come, and look, we're in various discussions, and each one of these companies has their own way of looking at the world. But some combination of cash payment, equity investment, work commitment on the project. We're hopeful that we will be able to advance the project through this year.
Yeah. And that's Telegraph specifically. I don't assume there's really any space to even begin talking about the other projects, but if you have anything to update me on, feel free to do that as well in the other projects.
Well, yeah, 1 minute on each project I think would be appropriate. Another copper project, Southmore. We found samples on surface up to 20% copper, 35 grams of gold. Very, very interesting project. Never been drilled, highly prospective, and deserves a close look. The Red Cliff mine, we did a few drill holes last year with our partner. One of the holes had 26 grams of gold over 2 meters. And it's kind of like with the telegraph. It's a great result. But the way the market was over the last few months, investors wanted fantastic results. We only delivered great. So there was a big yawn on that one. The two silver projects, and you touched briefly on them, Thea, one of the samples there had 39 kilos per ton of silver, 1,100 ounces of silver per ton. It's adjacent to the property that Goliath is working on, and the same geological setting. It deserves a lot of attention. And now that silver's picking up, I think we're going to start to hear the phone ringing about people looking for silver projects, and that I think will be at the top of the list for a lot of people. American Creek project, as you mentioned, the original Mountain Boy mine, the historic mine that was mined in the early 1900s, super high-grade silver mine. They mined it a little bit in the late 1990s. They built a road right up, and they were able to truck ore. They trucked it all the way to the smelter, a trail, 1,700 kilometers. They were trucking raw ore. That ore graded 18 kilos per ton of silver. There was one of the drill holes in 2006 hit 5 kilos of silver over 5 meters. So look, that area where the old mine was, a very enticing target, and there's many more truckloads of ore that could be taken out of there. It doesn't make sense to ship it to trail. You need something bigger to justify putting a plant on site. And that means, and we started doing that. That was our main focus until we acquired the telegraph. We're looking for the next 6 of those Mountain Boy type occurrences. And they're there. And we were starting to get our heads around the geology that would help us find. And it's a structurally related thing. And I think we've got to figure it out, but it's going to take a lot of drilling. And hopefully somebody wants a silver project and we'll take that on. The prize is very significant.
Right. Well, that's a good overview of these projects. Again, just basically, as I mentioned before, marketing, and you said networking, that's a good comeback, I suppose. Having spoken or having talked about marketing, what are you doing in terms of investor outreach? You and I met at PDAC, so you're doing PDAC. what else are you doing this year in terms of conferences or anything else to tell the story, basically?
Well, you know what, we've laid low when we announced the results and we saw the big sell-off. The markets were bad. We're for every share sold, there's a buyer. So we're certainly getting some level of interest in the stock. But the selling at some point is going to dry up. I think what's happened is every flow-through share that we've ever sold over the last few years is coming back at us. And they're going to run out of that. Internally, we already own a lot of the stock. So we're part of it. Before I went back to the public and said, okay, here's what we have, here's what we're going to do, I want to be a little more clear on what we're going to do. And at this stage, it's not certain. We would like to do a deal with a big player that would become a strategic investor.
Yeah.
And as we get a little more comfort, a little more confident that we have a time frame on that happening, then we'll start to beat the drums.
Right. And the best marketing is always insider buying, in my opinion. That's sort of the last thing that I wanted to ask you here is, but Rene Bernard has, one of your directors, has been buying in the open market for a while now, heavily. Any plans to ramp up insider buying yourself or anybody else? Like, how do you even talk or look at insider buying within the company?
Well, I think all of us involved in the company have a pretty significant position. And the big thing is getting some new buyers and in particular getting a strategic investor. And that's what we're working toward. And I'm very confident that we're going to get somebody. The merits of the project are so strong. And with the metal prices coming up as they are, the level of interest is certainly increasing.
Right. Okay. Well, Lawrence, this has been a good overview. Hopefully you can give me another update once you have better news on the financing front. But I think I'm out of questions for now. I'm better understanding the story. What am I forgetting to ask you though? What did you come here hoping to talk about, but I'm failing to bring up?
You've done a lot of digging into the company. You've got a great understanding of it. I really appreciate you putting the effort into understanding our story. It is a great story. The geologists love it. When we had the core at PDAC, we had a steady stream of geos coming over and looking at it. And we've had multiple follow-on discussions from major mining companies and other potential investors. So it's a very, very significant project. I'm very optimistic at this stage that we're going to do joint ventures on the other projects. It's going to create more news flow and not cost shareholders anything further on those other projects.
Yeah. Good. Well, I appreciate the overview again. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Lawrence.